Det här är en fågel!
Vi får så innan icke.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Longhouse, a true right show about politics, philosophy, art, etc., 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 all from a Nordic perspective. With me today, I am joined, as always, by Ludwig Path. Welcome back.
Thank you. So, hello everyone. This is going to be an interesting episode. So, as a bit of a throwback for the old fans of this very young show, we on the episode of on technology and Luddism, we had a bit of a segue into things like the more esoteric parts of the right, and we talked about people like Terence McKenna and people who are more involved in this kind of like psychedelia and these types of a bit more strange ideas. So I wanted to kind of explore this further, and we tried to put together a presentation at this point to kind of introduce some of these topics. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun today.
I think so too, and having looked through the presentation, I recognize that I'm probably this is out of my wheelhouse. So that's also why we brought with us a returning guest in the form of Vingel. Welcome back.
Hello, thank you for inviting me back. I've been looking forward to this. Like I just told you backstage, I was kind of stressed out right now because I was trying to find or to connect a better microphone, but I hope the audience will endure. And I guess I got some general knowledge from years back, and I haven't done too much prep, but I'm looking forward to Ludwig's presentation.
All right, I see some people have joined in the chat. Johannes this is a difficult one. Paleologos says it looks like Aldous Huxley on acid, and I think that's exactly what it is. But Ludwig would have to confirm. He's the one who's been so kind to do a lot of the art here on the channel. Hello, Nordanon. Hello, subscribe to Vingel. I will not have any links to different channels in my own live streams. But I will happily tell you all to check out Vingel's own channel, where he posts a lot of interesting stuff. My favorite is the interview with Mrs. Diana Mosley from the old BBC records. Is that correct, Vingel?
Indeed, the BBC Desert Island Discs.
Desert Island Disc.
Yeah. It ran for
Lady Diana Mosley, sorry.
Lady Diana Mosley, that's right. That show ran for many decades, but I'm sure that one is probably the most controversial airing. And I haven't posted too much lately, but yeah, I like to post some Norwegian folk music, some Tolkien-related videos and stuff. But I've been holding off right now because I'd like to subtitle a few videos and stuff, like a bit more substance to the content.
Yes, it's very, very good stuff, I think.
My favorite is actually the tram videos from Oslo.
Yeah, those are good too.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I actually didn't do anything with that apart from adding the Erik Satie tune, which I thought fit quite well. So yeah, appreciate hearing that.
All right. I know that in the presentation we have put together, we have a bit of current events set up as the first point. Would you like to get right into it, or should we wait a bit more for people to join in?
No, I think the current events part is a nice place for people to join in. It's kind of the idea there.
Now, this one is a bit of a follow-up from last week, in which we covered alt media right figures in Norway, and I stumbled upon this because during our research there, I ended up looking at a lot of their videos, and so I got recommended this one, which is a new podcast that this Helge Lurås started, which is a profile we covered last week. And me and Ludwig Path had a bit of a fun time listening to it and reacting to it. I'm not sure if you have anything you want to say before I go into it.
Yeah, I mean, so like from last time, Helge Lurås, we went over him. He is the chief editor of the Reset magazine. That's like trying to be this right or sort of alternative leaning media in Norway. And Sharika Hansen there is basically working at his magazine. I think she was one of the first people to come in.
Something we managed to uncover is that I think these two are dating from this podcast, because they talk about each other like they're living together, obviously, and they have shared children, or they have separate kids from different marriages. This is very Norwegian centric, but it's just I feel like we have to do our due diligence here, because we covered this as like this is a good right-wing alternative last week, and this podcast comes out, which is pretty much 20 minutes of this woman berating him for being a man. and the episode is supposed to be a discussion, air quotes, about men and women.
Yes, I think that was his plan. I mean, I finished the book on the Reset, and I mean, some of the stuff in the later chapters I wasn't able to bring on the last presentation. But this woman, Sharika Hansen, I mean, she is a sort of Somali woman who kind of moved here from Mogadishu, and who's been a kind of like this right-leaning celebrity figure, who's like this counter-jihad woman who wants to, to liberate all these Somali women, all these Muslim women, and make them liberals. So they become a sort of darling of the right and like these sort of FRP circles. And currently on the Reset magazine, she is in charge of she writes articles, and she is in charge of the lifestyle sections. So part of Helge Lurås's vision for Reset is apparently to not just have it be like document, like it's going to be this right-leaning intellectual newspaper. It's just supposed to be like a regular newspaper like VG.no that's supposed to have this more kind of like skeptical right-leaning content kind of spiced into it, which I totally get the idea, but that's also why I put him on the schlock axis in terms of quality. I mean, this podcast seemed to be, a part of that lifestyle section that they're going to do.
That might be it, but it left me with a bad taste in my mouth. I'll say that. It solidified why I would like to keep these spaces mostly male, because of the way women tend to be in intellectual conversations at times.
Yeah, we're getting right into it. I mean, we've been trying to simple. I tried to simple a little bit for Helge last episode here, but then he puts out this episode. I don't know what he is thinking exactly. If I was him, I'm not sure I would put this out. But to try to go into this kind of like cope mode, defense mode here, I can imagine that he is thinking more in terms of, okay, well, this is a little dramatic. This is kind of something that people will listen to. And to be fair, we're talking about it right now, right?
Yeah.
So he just thought, well, it's a little bit sort of drama reality show sounding, but we'll just put it out anyway because it'll get people talking, and it gets more clicks for us, I hope. Of course, the pessimistic interpretation is that he brought on his cohab. What's the English word for that when you have a man and a woman who cohabitate and they're not married? Is it just partners?
I think it's just a partnership. Yeah.
So he brought
Domestic
then,
partnership or something. Yeah.
he brought his domestic partner on to sit and talk about the differences between men and women. And apparently Sharika had some sort of pent up aggression towards Helge. Like there's some argument that they hadn't resolved, and she just spends 1 hour berating him about how he's not careful enough, he's not planning things, and he's not thinking about her enough. And it's like this entirely.
And how men need to be better at talking about their
Yes.
feelings, and he's trying to talk generally about men and women, and she says something generally about women, and then she immediately goes into the like, yeah, but I'm not like that. I don't do that, and it's just, oh my god, impossible. Like, just doesn't have the skill, or I guess the ability to sort of extrapolate and not center everything around yourself.
It is this kind of ego project thing where it's all about me in a sense. And I just got the impression that there was something unresolved personally there, and he was trying to just talk generally about men and women and have a calm conversation, and she turned up the heat on him on so many levels. But I mean, some of the takes that come out of that, it's like if Putin was better at sharing his feelings, then we wouldn't have a war
if
right now.
Putin was a woman, there wouldn't be a war. That was a take, and I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Odd. Okay. But I think that's enough ranting for now. We just wanted to sort of have a bit of a follow-up since we spent so long singing his praises last time. We'll just sort of level out and say that you should remain skeptical, friends.
BoomerCon points for Helge for this episode.
Okay. But from one ego boomer topic to the next one, the main topic, obviously, we're going to be talking about drugs, mind alteration, and the esoteric new left. I think you changed the title slightly to make it a bit more suitable for advertisers.
Oh yes, I had to change it multiple times. This is
you may have noticed I have removed any hints of the word brainwashing from from the title and any such advertisement.
I mean, I was actually going to do like an even more comprehensive view. I'm reading this book right now that I got recommended. Actually, you can see it in the YouTube comments from this other YouTuber that's called Witticism TV, and he recommended a book to me that's called Program to Kill: the politics of serial murder, and it goes into a lot of this sort of MK Ultra, like satanic pedo ring serial killer stuff. But I haven't finished it yet, so we're not getting to the good stuff quite yet. But I have a background of reading a lot of self-help literature, and that self-help literature has sort of led me into other interests, like a lot of these more sort of esoteric understanding of self, understanding of consciousness type books. And then I ended up, through a combination of that and some sort of like 4chan, 8chan memes, I ended up reading some sort of more esoteric new left literature that actually informed me on a lot of these things that I wasn't aware of in terms of like the role that drugs have played in the development of culture, the role that sort of influence has played, mind alteration, using different angles. I mean, we see it a lot now with the propaganda in the newspapers, but there's it's in no way new. There's a long history of this stuff that's been going from, I mean, like the subtitle I said there is from counterculture to totalitarianism. And I've tried to sort of present this information in a way to a kind of dissident right audience to kind of look at the sort of what we would call the leftist hegemony right now, and the friend-enemy distinction of, okay, what exactly is the left right now? How would we characterize it? Is it like, is it postmodern? Is it feminist? Is it neo-Marxist? Is it cultural Marxist?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you get all these problems about right-wingers trying to stack these boxes and these very neat categories to try to file where the left fits, and it never quite works. I've noticed, like, you're never quite able to pin them down.
They always sort of slip out of your grasp and then attack from a different angle.
Yes.
But I will add that, as I said earlier, for me, we're entering very uncharted waters, and I'm going to do my best to keep an open mind, and I think everyone in the chat should as well. Or if you're listening to this post stream, when we say, I think, and having looked through the presentation beforehand, I think when we use words like mind alteration and in some senses brainwashing, it can sound quite tinfoil hat like. But it's important to remember that influencing people in order to get them to behave the way you want is in a sense what advertisers and propagandists have been doing for quite a long time now. This is just a different angle of doing it, and part of the sort of the wild west of science that was the 1900s basically. So I think we should approach this not from the point of let's all get let's all try different drugs and get airlifted by UFOs and or start believing in lizard people, etc., etc. Like we're just trying to use this as sort of see it through this lens and see if we can learn anything new. As you said, try to find another way of identifying the left in the modern sense.
So I see Mongolian Doggerland asks for a sort of definition of the esoteric new left, and I mean it's not a specific category. It's just really, I mean, if you're familiar with the new left and some of these characters that pop up through the 60s, that is like the post-Marxist, like say you have the old school leftists that are these tankies that talk about the working class and economic conditions. And then you have the shift until the newer left that are more interested in civil rights and these kind of more sexual and social issues. And the esoteric part is, it just means hidden knowledge. It's really like the hidden Pokemon cards that you haven't found yet. It's these some of these characters in the new left that you probably didn't know about, but have had a huge influence on that direction of politics. And drugs come into that quite nicely as well. So
I guess I can just add to what you guys said there, that I mean, it's quite well known that the CIA and other sort of alphabet, I don't know what you call them, intelligence organizations, were trying to actually sort of experiment with mind control in the most literal sense, with like directly on people, but and you do become, of course, quite susceptible to new impressions. You're very impressionable under the influence of certain psychedelic drugs, but I'm of the impression that they basically found out, we can't really steer this, but they did end up steering the whole culture, sort of mainstreaming psychedelic culture and stuff instead. But yeah, we can get into that. I think I might have more to provide on the cultural later.
It's kind of why I called it the scientific Wild West, because a lot of the things you can read about 1900s, especially psychology, looking back at it now, especially from a right-wing perspective, you can have kind of like, what the hell were these people thinking moments? Why did anyone think this was okay? The crazy experiments, etc., etc. So it's important to remember that these things have happened, and we have allowed them to happen, all in the name of progress, capital P progress, as it's been used, because advancement for advancement's sake is, of course, obviously an inherent good to many of these people, and who cares if we have to destroy a couple of lives along the way?
Yeah, it's a gigantic social experiment, really. And it's not just like, why did we let so many people do this? Like, why did we let everybody do this? Like, everybody at some point thought these ideas were, okay, or
yes,
like, okay, this is the future, and this is really smart. But we could keep digging into it.
As always, it's the Pareto principle. It's the the 80% just sort of follow along in the fact that the rest of the 20% tell them that the future is this way. So I'll real briefly just welcome Spindly Opinion in the chat here, and also Jay Green River, welcome. There's some chatting going on. If you have any questions, please ask them in the chat. If they're relevant, I'll bring them up. If not, I will star them or favorite them, and then we'll go through them at the end of the presentation. So let's get right into it. What will be covered?
All right, yeah. I guess this page is a bit of a mystery here. So it's a few disclaimers first. This lecture or this stream is it's purely educational. First of all, I'm not advocating people do anything to each other or to politicians, and I'm not advocating that people do use any kind of drugs. It's purely educational, try and inform. I'm not advocating that you try to brainwash other people in your family or friends. I think that's enough for the disclaimers. Another disclaimer is that some of these topics that I'm going to bring up here is, it's very hard to discuss them seriously, like with a straight face. They don't fit into polite conversation. It's really this sort of reality is stranger than fiction situation where it just sounds so wacky that it's hard to talk about it and not be made fun of. So we're just going to try to do it a bit tongue in cheek here and ease people a bit into it. So I just wanted to, like, the picture that you have on the left here, the big one. I don't know if anybody recognizes it, but this is like this kind of old. You get back into this kind of old 4chan, 8chan politics boards, where they would start to use this kind of red pill, blue pill lingo, and they use like this template. The original template is actually, you have the left is like the liberal arts student, and to the right of him, that's the engineering student, and then you have like a STEM mathematics guy there. But they kind of redid this template to be about this kind of pill hierarchy. I don't know if you can zoom in on this, Walrus. Is that possible?
I'll see if I can at least expand the. Maybe I can do this. This might be better for the people watching.
Yeah. It's much better. So I had to censor out some things here. It's some naughty words and symbols used. So then we have like the green pillar on the left there. It's enigmatic. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but like the green pill guy is basically he is a sort of alternative version of the being red pilled, in a sense where he's red pilled about in the same way that sort of an Adam Curtis or like an Oliver Stone it would be red pilled. I hesitate to say not Michael Moore, but it is like this kind of leftist red pill in the way that can exist, where he's sort of aware of esoteric stuff. He's aware of he's aware of brainwashing. He's aware of public influence. He's probably read a lot of Noam Chomsky, like Manufacturing Consent. And he knows about like the Anglo-American Empire. He's read Carol Quigley and a lot of this, conspiracy literature. So, but he kind of rejects the kind of JQ frame on this whole thing, and he has much more of this kind of left libertarian angle. That's really just like a thinly veiled Gnosticism. For those who are familiar with it, we're getting into weird territory already. But I have seen it with some of the channels that I follow. Academic Agent recently had a stream that's about this kind of pagan stuff, pagan critique of Christianity. I follow The Crucible. For those of you who do, that's this debate channel, and they had like these two Orthodox priests on. Just didn't talk about demonic possession, and like all of this stuff comes in to this character. It's like that's what he knows about. So he's like super green pilled. He's got the tinfoil hat. He's got the protective auras. He's like anti the Illuminati here, and he's holding a book there that's called Prometheus Rising. And like I actually read this book as a self-help book, but it does contain. It's written by an author called Robert Anton Wilson. That's really been one of the disciples of Timothy Leary. That's someone that we're going to get into later. Who was like this psychedelic guru, and he tried to basically translate some of Timothy Leary's ideas to the layman. And some of the ideas in that book is basically how do you break down the way human consciousness functions, and how do you sort of program a person, basically how do you use that to kind of program yourself to think differently and break away from the conditioning, as Alex Jones would say. How do you break the conditioning? It's kind of what the book is about, to give you a very detailed, granular theory of how to think about consciousness and think about the world and ideology and so forth, and then how you can sort of manipulate yourself to not to have that used against you.
It is certainly an angle to take. We talk about it all the time about using the term the boomer truth regime, and how you break out of that.
Yes,
it's very similar, if not the same, in a lot of areas. I think it might just be a different angle of attack to go through.
Oh yes,
through it this way.
I'm glad you brought that up, because this is exactly, like, you're exactly getting the point. The book is not just like a regular book that would have you just have a bunch of theory and some opinions and that's it. Like, the book actually has assignments, like a school book, where you have to, like, it will ask you to, in order, like, if you want to decondition yourself of this current reality that you're living in, you have to do these things. Like, you have to watch maybe, like, you watch a show on Discovery Channel about animals, so you should write an essay, and, like, you just take an opinion that you have and then just spend 2 hours writing an essay defending the contrary opinion to what you hold. And breathing exercises, meditation, these sort of other physical exercises and things that you can do to try to, like, break the conditioning. So it's very detailed. And I mean, like the academic agent talks about with deboomerization and trying to read literature from before 1950.
Yes.
That would be a version of that. Like, you're actually trying to expose yourself to something different and decondition the boomerisms. So he's getting into the same thing. And I was actually very happy when they started talking about deboomerizing and people who are making fun of that. I mean, you really are missing the point here, because this is a part of how the new left was so successful, is that they took this granular approach to trying to change these very foundational micro parts of people's lives, instead of going for the politics or trying to just change attitudes. They try to change, like, these very basic things that didn't seem political at the time, but actually had political implications. These other two characters are just like parody characters. I mean, the blue pill guy is like, he's just a regular blue pill, as being right now he's talking about the Ukraine.
He supports the current thing, as we say.
He supports the current thing. He always supports the current thing. And then we have, like, the red pill parody here. Like, he was usually called, like, the red pill with apostrophes or quotation marks, where it's like this kind of Wignat caricature that just talks about the JQ all the time and has and basically has delusions around it. So you had a lot more. You had more characters, but I just wanted to show these three so we could get into trying to understand how like what angle I'm coming from on these topics.
Yes. I have a clip here which I feel is slightly relevant and also funny, which I want to include every time we are about to dive into right-wing / esoteric topics from now on. So I'll just play that. It's 5 seconds.
Nice argument, Senator. Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
There we go.
Yep.
So get ready, kids. Okay. Managing societies of mass and scale.
This is familiar territory, and this is kind of the bridge that I wanted to take to see, okay, how do we get into this stuff? This is a common talking point that's being discussed a lot in the dissident right circles, inspired by some of the works of James Burnham. I mean, we live in what we could describe as a technocracy, or sort of managerial state. It's sort of two words of the same thing, where you've come to this point where it's like that you have a mass society. We can go to different countries in the West, and you feel like there's almost no distinguishing features anymore between these countries. If I'm in Norway, or I go to Belgium, or I want to go to Spain, or then I go to the United States, like you have the same restaurants, the same cars, the same brands, and so on. And these I mean, this is not by accident. This is about scaling society up in terms of corporations that are like global corporations, government that is global government, and there's a lot of benefits to this, but it requires a lot of knowledge, and and there's so much complexity in it that the old model of capitalism basically has to be thrown out. You can't have these like local hotels or local grocery stores with a single owner that's been passing it down to his son and his son before that.
I think to
That's
some
like, you know-
to some extent, the sort of the mid-century idea of capitalism can also be refuted by what this has turned into. When you think about someone like the sort of the giants of industry, quote unquote, like Henry Ford, the sort of the mock kings who were able to almost create like societies around their factories, this is nothing like what we've ended up with in terms of the interconnectivity of the managerial class that we have today. I think, but you might disagree with me there, Ludwig.
No, you're absolutely on point. Is that these old capitalist elites that are the owners of the capital and the owners of the property, they wanted to scale up, but scaling up to a point requires so much technological and expert knowledge that they just didn't have, so they had to give control over to the experts. So then you get like the expert bureaucracy that is actually trying to wrestle power away from the sort of managerial, away from the old capitalist guard. And the way that they're doing this is really by making it more complex. It's not like they're just coming on doing the job they're supposed to do. They keep making these organizations more and more complex to give themselves more power and take it away from the owners. I mean, this is I mean, I have a sort of similar situation even where I work currently, that we're getting to the point now where the company keeps scaling up and we have to bring in new people. And these new people are requiring, like, they want, shares. They want parts of the company. They want to get higher salaries and more control. And like, the more complexity and the more stuff they add in there, the more control we have to give them. I think a good example of this in the current age we're living in is Larry Fink. For those of you who are not familiar with him, he is the head of BlackRock, sort of BlackRock Investments, where I think, you look at his fortune, the amount of money that he has like maybe, his personal fortune is maybe $2 billion, and that's a lot of money for a regular person, but he manages, I think, almost 10% of the entire like Western economy as a sort of portfolio. And the way that
not only manages, I mean, he has relations to 10% of the economy, and if you start thinking about how that spider web can possibly spread, in terms of connections, that's a lot of potential power.
It's a lot of potential power, and I can't get into this very deeply. So if there are some economists in the comments that, I mean, you're just going to have to sit and cringe at my understanding of this. But like, the way I understand how Larry Fink got a lot of his power is that he's been working in finance his entire life, but he was actually, when you talk about the 2008 housing crisis, that happened because there was a lot of, debt, basically, that was like this mortgage debt that was packaged and sold around to these different companies, that the debt that was sold was basically, it was not very well understood what these banks were buying. So they were buying and selling debt that was just, I mean, it was really bad debt, in a sense that there was mortgages and housing loans that were given to people who had no capability of actually paying it back, but to these banks who had a limited understanding of how this kind of mortgage-backed security worked. It seemed to be solid because they didn't understand the product. And Larry Fink was one of the creators of the mortgage-backed security. He created like this incredibly complex product. That product is then being sold around. they don't understand it's crap, so it crashes the entire economy. And Larry Fink was then brought in by like the government to clean it up. And
Yes.
what part of the reward for him cleaning up the economy was that he got to manage a much larger portfolio. So he basically creates complexity. The complexity fucks up the economy, and then he's brought in to clean up the economy that he himself fucked up because of the complexity introduced. And then he just exponentially increased the amount of power he had in the system. So he's just the perfect example of this type of like technocratic elite that we have right now. I mean, you could imagine a similar case with certain labs, certain places, and people, work. Okay, we're not going to get into that.
It's part of the cathedral. Let's put it like that. I will add that if you want a more detailed look on the mortgage-backed security and how we ended up in the 2008 housing crisis, Radical Liberation on his channel has done a wonderful series where they dive quite deeply into how we ended up here. And I say we as the West. I mean, obviously it's an American issue, but it rippled quite severely to everyone else, of course.
If I may, this is not my wheelhouse at all, really, but I was reading Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher like a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it was funny. Like, this is from 2008, and what made me think of this is you mentioned like the new kind of capitalist, like Fink, and he actually explicitly names George Soros and Bill Gates as liberal communists, which I haven't really gotten into that terminology, but I thought it was quite funny. And it's from 2008 as well, so
interesting.
Mark Fisher was a Marxist of some like an old school left guy, but it was quite based actually.
Yeah, the book is absolutely great from our perspective. It's like you have some of these people like Mark Fisher, Adam Curtis, I think Oliver Stone at some point, some parts of Chomsky. Like, from our perspective, it's actually just precious.
Yeah, it's quite surprising how coming from the left, he comes across as quite reactionary to us now. So yeah. Anyway, just
okay.
an anecdote.
Just an anecdote. I mean, we could just follow down these points. I think everybody's sort of familiar with some of the technology that's being used when you have not just global businesses and a public-private partnership, but this is being run on a global scale. And to run this on a global scale, you need technology, and you need a lot of technology. So mass media is an absolute condition for this to work. There's no technocracy. There's no managerial state without mass communications. That's where you get the manufacturing of consent, where you can keep society totalitarian. You can keep keep people having the same opinions and avoid that they're going to fall into their own camps and just, live in their own, like they're going to live in local communities and where they have their own beliefs and kind of control their own thoughts. So you have to have a large amount of people with the same opinions. So it's the manufacturing.
You have to run the show with the blue and the reds and what is it that Curtis Yarvin says, if you present someone with two options, they ask which one is correct, and if you present someone with one option, they will ask, is this one correct? So if you present one with two sides, people will pick a side instead of questioning if those are the only sides.
You got to keep the wrestling show going.
Yes.
The hyper reality. I mean, there's been a lot of people covering that. I think most of the people with high degrees of dissident right literacy are familiar with it. The next point is the information technology, like the internet. That's been around for a while. It's been a powerful tool. I mean, it was supposed to be a tool of decentralization in the beginning, of this kind of like peer-to-peer, Urbit style, distributed democratic stuff, but it just has ended up being another tool used by centralized power, by having this client server architecture everywhere. And I mean, you have the big, that says big data and machine learning. I mean, I actually mean like data warehouses and artificial intelligence, like Google uses, the stuff that YouTube uses to censor your comments. I mean, you think about these tech platforms, how much work it is to sit and censor comments. You can't do that without having this kind of like having massive amounts of data and artificial intelligences that have trained to do it. We talked about reset on the last episode. They said that one of the problems with scaling up an internet newspapers was the comment section, and how people just keep saying all this sort of unoptical stuff. So you have to moderate through all of this manure, and it's so difficult to get people to do it. So they have to use robots basically, and that's where you see more and more on these large sites and scales. They have to be kept clean of dissident opinions, and that's where you have it's not possible without this technology.
Yes, and you see people lamenting that to this day, that they long for the Wild West of the early 2000s internet, where everybody could just put up a site and you could get opinions from anywhere basically. I will add to this, is like kind of information technology, but it probably goes under the big data. I mentioned this before, that I have a personal crusade against any centralized census bureau in any country, because my opinion is that the only reason that a country would keep a census bureau that does anything other than count the people exists purely to enable that government to control either the economy or you in some form. Otherwise, why would they want to know all these different things about you or about the people in general? And if you add big data / machine learning technology to this information, I mean, we're starting to think about some quite some dangerous stuff here.
Yes, because some of the stuff we're going to talk about in the presentation goes back to the 60s and 70s, before the internet, and then it was just basically paranoia city. For anybody, if you watch movies from that time period, the amount of like angst and paranoia that's running there, it's quite different. And I mean, that came from the need to control opinion and the need to weed out dissidents. Yes. But then you had to have people doing it, so everybody, it's like 1 in 5 people were some kind of informant or spy for some kind of informational organization, and the FBI just had their hands everywhere. That became a lot easier and more peaceful with the internet and the surveillance, like your cell phone and other types of things where your data is just constantly recorded, so you don't have to pay like 1 out of 5 people to sit and snitch on you.
Yeah, you can just get the information directly. Yep. To some extent, of course, but it's surprising how detailed you can get with very unspecified information about someone.
Yep, I mean it is true. It
sounds like a paradox, but
no, I mean unspecified information is not really unspecified at all. I mean, things exist in a context, right? Things are chaotic, but they're not that random. So there's a lot of information you can infer if you're smart about people, if you just have some meta information about when they're leaving their house, or who's sending the packages, or but like the last point here is probably, I think, something that's being talked about, but I think it's probably the least emphasized, at least in our circles, of all these tools that's being used to manage the state, is the medical technology. So that, I guess, big pharma, that's what leftists would call it before, like the last 2 years with the benevolent Pfizer and Moderna.
I think even further than that, I think if you look at the way the medical industry has gone in America, it's almost like a class of people that lives to serve with their bodies, almost, the medical companies.
Yes. And I mean, this is one thing that you think about, if you remove the mass media or remove the technology, but I think about, what if you removed some of the medicine? What would happen? I mean, let's say you removed antidepressants from the world. What kind of society you would have? Mm-hmm. The amount of people who would just they're putting up with things the way they are because they're on drugs. And there's an increasing amount of people who are living in the society who are putting up with it and who are acting mellow. They're acting civilized because they're constantly being influenced by some kind of psychotropic substance that they're getting from the government. So that they're constantly being tried to kept in check. I mean, the discussion now is, of course, moving towards more of this legalization, and that's going to be another stream where I'm going to talk about the Norwegian kind of like this drug lobby to legalize the drugs.
'cause
but
they've been pushing quite hard the past 10 years, and I think we're closing in on. I guess it's not legalization; is decriminalization.
Decriminalization.
Yeah, that's what we're moving towards.
So yeah, decriminalization leads to legalization. Medicalization leads to normalization. I think we all know this, right?
Culture is downstream from law, etc., etc.
So I mean, that's one of the things. Like, how many people who would like you stop taking these things and they would just have all these feelings about how they think everything is wrong or how angry they are about society. It would just be unleashed. Like, you would just have this this kind of ultra violence that would just be like unleashed on society immediately if the pipeline of these pills that are going into these people would stop. You have, of course, the birth control and the artificial insemination. Birth control, I mean, specifically if it's like the morning after pill or the contraceptions, pills that basically enable women to participate in society the way that they're doing. If that goes away, then a lot of this sort of feminism stuff, it just poof, it's just gone, right? I mean,
I'll add, it's not just participate. I mean, it's freedom from consequence as well. It's freedom from responsibility. It's much deeper than just being part of society.
No, well, they are part of society, but I think about in terms of like holding the same types of jobs that men hold, and
sure,
like participating in that part of society that just wouldn't be possible. And we talked about, like, with the LGBT stuff, how some of these penicillin and some of these like the cures for this kind of AIDS medication and some of that stuff, it's like if they didn't have that and a lot of these contraceptives, like, they could not exist as a kind of political block the way they do now.
Mm-hmm. If you're not sure what we're talking about here, I'll just shill briefly. We did a stream on some LGBTQ plus alphabet stuff. I think it's 2 episodes ago, the Longhouse episode 6. So if you're watching this, once you're done, go look at episode 6 for some more spicy stuff.
Keep watching.
Keep watching.
You do not stop watching the Longhouse.
I'm going to start playing I'm going to try to start playing the spinning hypnosis stuff in a minute.
It's coming. The sissy hypnosis from the Longhouse. We put subliminal messages into the slides as well, so we'll get all of you eventually.
Yes.
Let's see. But I mean, we could go on like this. But I put mind alteration there as a sort of question mark, because you need to look at, I mean, depressants and antidepressants is a form of mind alteration already, right? Even stuff like ADHD medication and all this sort of like SSRIs I saw mentioned in the comment section. People who just can't focus and do their jobs if they don't get these pills. I mean, I think, in America, they're like super usual. I haven't seen it as much in Norway. I suspect it might be coming as we fail to deal with the amount of like men in school who can't concentrate.
Yeah.
But like with some of these Americans, it's especially I think about it a lot when I see some of these streamers. I'm usually shocked at like the attention spans that they have and how they can keep going for as long as they can. How you think someone like Vosh can keep going for like a 24-hour like debate stream and stuff. He's just like popped full Adderall and this stuff, but we're not gonna
I haven't thought
go
about
too far into that.
No, but it's a possibility too, because if anything, researching for this stream, it's reminded me of how little we actually understand the human mind. Still, we think we do, but we don't understand it very well. And who's to say that if your parents are both on antidepressants, that's not gonna change your behavior over time as well?
It is
when you're born. I mean, it might actually have physiological implications.
Yes. See, there's a lot of women who get this kind of post-birth depression. I don't know why it happens.
Postpartum depression.
Yeah, postpartum depression, and they're just prescribed antidepressants.
Yeah.
I do recommend, I mean, if you're listening to this and if you're going to take something from the stream, then at least just consider the amount of stuff that you're putting in your body in terms of pills and what this actually, do you actually need it? Is this actually constructive to your life? But we should
Mhm.
move on to the next slide.
Here we
Let's
go.
see. We got
Aldous Huxley.
we got Aldous Huxley here. This is I mean, I've put some of these characters in here. They have like a very similar profile. I was thinking of putting them in like they have like a police profile with the similar points underneath. But you know, the reason I wanted to bring him up is that he is kind of the bridge here to explain a bit more of what I'm talking about. For those of you who don't know him, he is most known as being an author and a philosopher. Very highly rated student. If you click on the British elite stock there, you can see his family tree.
At the moment.
I mean, it's interesting because now we're really talking about like high up in the British academic elites. His brother, I think it was Julian Huxley, was a very prominent eugenicist. And I think his grandfather was like one of Darwin's watchdogs. I think they even end up marrying into the Darwin family later in the family tree there. I assume that there's people in the comments section who are a lot more familiar with this genealogy here. But I mean, we're just like talking about the absolute kind of premier minds in the United Kingdom, both in terms of their output and in terms of the influence that they had on people. So Huxley wrote a lot of novels where he would try to talk about various topics, and one of these topics, the recurring topics, is drugs. And the role of drugs, being a kind of totalitarian tool in society, and not just being a tool, but also in terms of like the drug experience as a kind of transcendental experience. So the book Brave New World is probably his most famous work, released sometime in the 1930s. About this, like, okay, what's the managerial state going to look like? More as a type of satire book. And this, I mean, a lot of people like to think that this is just some spacey, imaginational stuff that he just came up with because it's this incredibly, precious, imaginative INFP personality. But I mean, this is actually the ideas that were in Brave New World are the type of ideas that were being discussed in the circles that he frequented. Like, that's what they were talking about in terms of how are we going to manage the societies of the future. So Walrus, you mentioned that you were reading this book or listening to it pretty recently.
I read it some years ago, or it's quite a few years ago actually now, and I didn't pay much attention to it then. It was the same time I read 1984, and I got recommended this one as well. But in the later years, I've definitely come to see myself as leaning more towards. We talked a bit about it before the stream that maybe our reality is a mix of 1984 and Brave New World, but I think that it's currently more Brave New World than 1984. So for this stream, when I saw we were doing Huxley, I figured I put on the old radio play of the story and listen to it again. And I was I know I don't like to use the word shocked. I was surprised at looking back at it how reactionary and on point the analysis in a sense is of our current managerialistic system. I also dug up an old quote I have from one Neil Postman from a book he wrote called Amusing Ourselves to Death, which is mostly a book about how modern technology and television, etc., is going to basically ruin politics, which in a sense it has. Excuse me. And I want to read, if you will allow me, a passage from the book where he sort of sidelines both Orwell and Huxley's take. Postman concludes that Huxley is the one who was right. I'm not sure if I agree, but it's a good it's a good explanation of what the story of Brave New World is. And I'll summarize the message of the book first, which is mostly the idea that complacency and manufacturing, or complacency and consent, is a lot easier to manufacture than having to brute force control, which I think many would see as the 1984 approach.
Yes. So 1984 has a lot more of this kind of hard.
Oh, I think you cut out there. Yeah, we lost him. I think.
Yeah, I can't confirm. Can't hear
him. While he is gone, I'll just read this passage and then we'll catch up. So, quoting from Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. We were keeping our eye in 1984 when the year... Our eye on 1984, sorry. When the year came and the prophecy didn't, thoughtful Americans sang softly in praise of themselves. The roots of...
Yeah, they're...
Oh, he's back.
Did somebody fall
Hello?
out?
You did.
You fell out.
Oh, I fell out. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're gonna have
You've
to
been
start
gone for...
beginning.
Yeah, you've been gone for about a minute.
Okay, let's see. I'm just going to start on Brave New World. So the
you were talking about 1984.
Yeah, right. Okay, 1984. Let's just say that's more of the Stalinist type of managerialism, where they will use techniques like gaslighting. They would use physical punishment. It's like Pavlovian conditioning, very base Pavlovian conditioning. If you say the wrong thing, you get the kind of physical punishment, type of isolation, gaslighting techniques, trying to deprive people. And these are also conditioning techniques, but in Brave New World, it's more about making people comfortable being serfs, and using things like the idea of using the drug to pacify people, and then they would use, say, introducing people to sex early. That's also a part of Brave New World, where they even as low as kindergarten, that sounds familiar now, but they talked about trying to introduce kindergartners to sex and sex play, and trying to play with themselves and play with each other, and break the taboo really early. And just that is just a constant sort of focus of the book, is trying to sort of engage in promiscuous dating.
Yeah, very much. I think this is where maybe his critique of some of the Marxist ideas in this book comes from, in that it's created this sort of like, I don't remember where I encountered this concept earlier, so maybe someone in the chat or in the comments can help me, but the fact that we're moving towards sort of like a brother-sister society instead of a man-woman or wife-husband society. So the relationship has been entirely destroyed, and there's a communism, in air quotes, of sex and relationships. There's at one point, the director of the incubators has a quote about an ex of his. I won't go into further detail than that, but he says that it was nothing emotional or long drawn. It was perfectly healthy and normal. So,
yeah.
And for the control thing, again, I told you this before the stream. There's a quote that the woman in the book tells the main character when he asks, "Don't you want to be free?" And she answers, "But I am free. I'm free to have the most wonderful time." And he, of course, lashes back with, "Yeah, but I want to be free to have a bad time, to have challenge, to have loss, to have etc. etc. etc." So in a sense, it's a warning that we are gonna manage ourselves through sort of this soft power economics into realizing that, but actually everything that makes us human is actually bad because it's tedious.
It just
so
gets
we're
in
just
the
going
way.
to eliminate it. Yeah.
So I'm just going to quickly go through the ideas here. I mean, these ideas are also names of his books. the perennial philosophy has been covered on, I think, Keith Wood's channel. I don't think Aldous Huxley is the originator of this idea, but he wrote a book about it. This is really more about like these similarities between the world religions in terms of religious experiences, that they have a sort of common core of a type of spiritual experience that sort of is universal to human beings, and that kind of connects all of the religious traditions under one parasol. The book Doors of Perception, I guess it's much short.
Sorry, Ludwig, can I just say I find this concept quite interesting myself. I mean, I haven't read the perennial philosophy, but I've always been interested in, like, I have an abbreviated version of The Golden Bough by, what's he called again? William Fraser, I think. George William Fraser or something. And also Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Sort of comparative mythology. And I can understand that sort of Orthodox or like believing Christians and stuff often ridicule these concepts, but well, I don't know if I really have a larger point, but it's quite fascinating to see all the similarities in myths from around the world. So I've been keen to read Huxley's book actually about that. So.
Yeah, no, I've not read perennial philosophy myself. It's really more of like some of these I've read Brave New World and Doors of Perception. The other two I had to look at summaries.
Yeah,
but
the
I
Doors
hear
of
them.
Perception is a good read. I mean, it's quite interesting for what it is.
Yes, the Doors of Perception is. I mean, Huxley's first dive into actually doing psychedelics. So he did a dose of mescaline. That is, as far as I understand, a type of plant-based psychedelic that it's easier to get your hands on in the United States. It's a bit similar to peyote. It has, we'll get into it later, but like similar effects to what you'd get from LSD, maybe magic mushrooms.
Yeah, I believe it comes from a cactus, a sort of cacti. Yeah.
So, but it's like they don't grow where we're from, so it is more of like this South American concoction. And he will just describe this kind of experience that he had in very good detail. I mean, if your verbal IQ is as high as this guy, he can make anything interesting basically. So he has a very vivid, on point description of the experience. So for those of you familiar, I mean, the name The Doors, the band that's called The Doors, like they have their title from this book.
Yeah, I believe, I mean, it might be directly from this book, or it might be referencing the William Blake poem that Huxley is referencing, actually, which I pulled up here. I believe it's from the 1700s, and the relevant part goes, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern. And this is quite relevant, or quite understandable for someone who has done psychedelics, I think, and thought about it. I mean, humans don't use full capacity of their brains, of course, and there's something very real about the psychedelic experience, or a spiritual experience in general. Obviously, William Blake didn't drop acid, or he probably didn't eat mushrooms either. I don't know, maybe. But there is a very real sense of our general lived experience is stupid because all experience is lived. So kind of a pet peeve there. But our everyday experience is quite limited for good reason, because if we had all of the vibrations from the cosmos or whatever, I know this is getting very new age sounding, streaming into your consciousness all the time, you wouldn't be able to cope. You wouldn't be able to feed yourself or your kids or stay warm or whatever. So the idea, in a way, in psychedelic culture is
You
summed
find
up by
this.
by the Blake
You don't
quote.
necessarily have to go to psychedelic culture of this. You find this in a lot of the perennial traditionalists as well.
For
The
sure.
idea that Evola talks about it as well. The idea that societally there exists sort of like a consciousness metaphysical plane in which we all sort of partake, not necessarily actively, but it's shaping the quote unquote real world view of our society, etc., etc.
Yeah, and if I may just add, I think a lot of people have the impression, and I'm not gonna say I have the correct answer necessarily, but a lot of people have the idea that a spiritual experience or a spiritual experience as experienced through psychedelics is sort of distorted or fake, sort of phony. It's chemicals in your brain and sort of brush it aside. But once you have that experience, you realize, like I guess I'm repeating myself, sort of, that it's actually extremely real. So
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit after the last stream, Ludwig, that it might be a bit difficult for us on the right to accept it. I know it myself, but I think it's important to recognize that there are traditions and ancient customs for this type of spiritual understanding, using quote unquote natural drugs in proper environments as part of important rituals that seem to have led to some knowledge that we maybe not have anymore.
And just to comment on it, let's bring it back to a sort of trad angle here. But I think the reason a lot of people are turning to these type of psychedelics is that the modern lifestyle has basically turned off spirituality for a lot of people. To use this language, there's no spiritual reserves to go off here. Like, these people are basically constantly fed. They're constantly having a lot of food. They're never in danger. Like, their entire lives are completely controlled. You're always being stimulated. So that there's no pathway for even with certain things like painkillers, there's no pathway for you to have these experiences other than taking these drugs, because people in the past, they would have death a lot closer to them. They would get various kinds of diseases. They would starve, perhaps for days. They would, not coom every like other hour, basically. So the potential there for them to have these types of experiences that are a little bit more spiritual in nature was a lot higher, even without the drugs.
You can hear some echoes of that if you ever talk to someone who's done the. It's pretty. If you ever talk to someone who's done keto, or someone who's doing the fasting rhythm that's quite popular now, the is it 16/8 fasting,
intermittent
stuff.
fasting?
Yes. They usually will comment that when they're hungry, they're more focused, and things like that.
Yes. And I think, even say you're an extreme athlete. If you're a marathon runner and you try to run for 48 hours, it's like without stopping, maybe like 72 hours, you're going to be having these kinds of experiences, like with no drugs. Or you try to isolate yourself in a dark room for 24 hours, you will start having these kind of like out of body type experiences. But we're so kind of like comfortable and sheltered from it in this modern type of world that it's just this kind of complete chasm between us and a lot of these experiences.
Can I just add that in regards to the traditional aspect, that apparently mushrooms and similar substances were used for group bonding. This is of course not history, because this is regarding prehistory, but like in the Paleolithic age and onwards, prior to farming made civilization possible, granaries and stuff. But
right.
Well, I got kind of derailed there, but I just want
no, it's interesting.
Yeah, and I just want to reply to Volpe's persona in chat as well. He says, or he or she, I don't know. in my experience, the genuine spiritual experience far transcends the stimulated ones. And speaking of perennial philosophy, there's comparative mythologist, or he probably has other titles, called Mircea Eliade. He argued this exact point, and it certainly can be argued. But my point earlier was also that the stimulated experience isn't intrinsically fake. I mean, there are these mushrooms, for instance, they have a very long history with humans. So, I mean, they're sort of hardwired to be compatible with our brains. And of course, this does not mean that I am advocating for it. It's just just my thought. But certainly meditation, or either in the Western or Eastern sense of it, is a safer endeavor, I'm sure.
And we have a slide about psychedelics later, so maybe we can revisit this.
Yeah, I think just in the interest of time, there is a link there to an interview with Huxley. And I was thinking we were going to watch 5 minutes of it, but I think we will not be able to finish the entire presentation if we spend too much time.
Yes, I can share it in the chat.
Just share it in the chat for the people who want to go look at it themselves. It's quite a fascinating listen.
But not right now. Keep watching
just
the Longhouse.
Keep watching Longhouse. And just to finish up here, the last book that he published, I think, was Island. And this is in the 1960s, where you get a very stark turn from Brave New World that you said, Walrus, is sort of a satirical reactionary critique of this managerial state. But in Island, you see it's like Huxley has become a little bit paused. I'm sorry to say, but he's kind of accepted the progressive sort of utopia in a sense. So he puts forward, like, Island is not a satirical book. It's like this kind of genuine type of philosophical.
I think he said it himself. It's sort of like a third option inside his own sort of universe here.
Yes.
Whereas Brave New World is one, the savagery parts of Brave New World is the other, and Island is supposed to be sort of the I don't know if you want to call it the synthesis.
Island, I mean, I have to kind of butcher it a little bit in the interest of time. People in the comments who've actually read it talk, I don't capture the complexity, but from a right-wing perspective, Island is kind of like this kind of anarcho-communist type of idea where these people have an island that's like this kind of communism, where they have basically adoption clubs where they go back to sort of like everybody's kind of sharing children with everybody else. They live kind of free from technology and technological distraction, and they have like they use contraceptive technology so that they can have sort of sex without children and use sex as a kind of release valve. And they will have these kind of like drug ceremonies to bond. The ethics is a kind of like Buddhist type of ethics, and they have. So that's kind of what's going on there. He's embracing a lot of these, progressive ideas in that book.
Yes, I think what's strange is how many of the things he warned about in Brave New World he implements as utopian with a new coat of paint in Island.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
very weird, yeah.
But I mean, just to finish it on finish the note here. I mean, Island basically ends with these people being wiped out by a more masculine civilization, which is usually what happens. That's like the fate of these kind of like prehistory communist civilizations.
Yes. Now, I started when you cut out. I started reading from the Neil Postman book. I would like to do that before we move on, but if you have anything else you want to say.
No problem. I don't have any more on Huxley, so go right ahead.
So I started reading this while we thought Ludwig had disconnected, but he came back in the middle of it. So I'll just start from the top. I had just begun. This is from Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. We were keeping our eye on 1984. When the year came and the prophecy didn't, thoughtful Americans sang softly in praise of themselves. The roots of liberal democracy had held. Wherever else the terror had happened, we, at least, had not been visited by Orwellian nightmares. But we had forgotten that, alongside Orwell's dark vision, there was another, slightly older, slightly less known, equally chilling. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Contrary to common belief, even among the educated, Huxley and Orwell did not prophesy the same thing. Orwell warns that we will be overcome by an externally imposed oppression. In Huxley's vision, no big brother is required to deprive people of their autonomy, maturity, and history. As he saw it, people would come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. What Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much information that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared that truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared that we would become a trivial culture, preoccupied with some equivalent of the feelies, the orgy-porgy, and the centrifugal bumble puppy. As Huxley remarked in Brave New World Revisited, the civil libertarians and rationalists who are ever on the alert to oppose tyranny failed to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions. End quote. In 1984, Orwell added, "People are controlled by inflicting pain." In Brave New World, they are controlled by inflicting pleasure. In short, Orwell feared that what we fear will ruin us. Huxley feared that what we desire will ruin us. And that's it. Okay.
Oh, that was beautiful.
Yeah, I really like that passage.
I see people are basically starting to mention Wilhelm Reich in the comments, and that's without any of us bringing it up. So I think they know where we're going.
Yeah.
Guys. Yeah. I think we can
But
skip
first-
this slide
you
here
wanna skip
because
this
we've
one?
already covered so much of this.
Okay, let's get
this
into
stuff,
the orgasm box.
Yeah. Let's get in our Orgone accumulators and. Right. Yeah. As we mentioned earlier, we're gonna look at two characters here. I mean, we're getting to them. So this is, the familiar new left. If you're in our circles, when they're going to talk about, well, who were these characters behind the cultural Marxism or the critical theory, or the stuff that's in the universities that laid the groundwork for the new leftism that we see now. You know, Marcuse's name I've heard mentioned. Theodore Adorno, with the authoritarian personality, gets mentioned. They talk about like the denazification programs that were run after the Second World War, and trying to kind of pathologize the masculine personality.
Mm-hmm.
Horkheimer.
In many ways, it's the source of if men only talked about their feelings, war wouldn't happen. So,
yeah, I mean, it's like
calling back to our first slide.
where does mid-century Germanism come from, right? So it's like this personality and trying to pathologize it, and really trying to. So we're looking at these two, whether it's the Frankfurt School, and we're looking at the kind of New York-based certain ethnicity who's been brought in from Germany and some places from Europe, with the French intellectuals. Foucault is the guy that comes up. Derrida, I don't think he was French. I think he was from somewhere else, but. Foucault is a very seminal figure as a sort of a postmodern thinker whose opinions, a lot of it was just like post hoc rationalizations for being a pedo, and I think it's hard to deny that in retrospect. Jean-Paul Sartre, I kind of hesitated in putting in here, but he was a Marxist and an existentialist. So already here we're seeing some of the synthesizing here between Nietzsche and Marx. Where existentialism, could be viewed from a kind of right-wing Nietzschean perspective, but the way you see what a lot of these new left thinkers is that they synthesize these thinkers in a way that they just become completely paused. I don't know Are any of you familiar with the term the Masters of Suspicion?
It rings a bell, but no.
Nope.
You see, the Masters of Suspicion is like it's basically three thinkers that are considered to be seminal or very important for the modern West, and the thinkers are Friedrich Nietzsche, Sigmund Freud, and Karl Marx, who all brought in like this kind of hermeneutics of suspicion, or in the history of ideas, it's really like three ways of telling the old ideology that it's just cope, right? It's like Christianity and like all this sort of like metaphysics and all of these ideas that they had. It's just post hoc rationalizations for power and materialism. And or sexuality in the terms of Freud. I mean, with Freud, it's basically everything.
With Nietzsche, it's power. With Freud, it's
With Freud, it's sex, and with Marx, it's like it's capital,
class, and economics.
And like the
capital.
The what you call the means of production. So, I mean, you have these three, and you look at them separately. Say someone like Nietzsche can be seen as being very right wing. When he talks about high culture and the aristocracy and the will to power, this is inherently like this Bronze Age pervert.
I was going to say that's pretty much the Bronze Age pervert. And I remember a couple of streams ago we mentioned a Swedish character by the name of it just escaped me. A playwright.
Strindberg?
Yes, August Strindberg. Sorry. Whom I also touched briefly about in my very first Hamsun stream, who shared many of Nietzsche's views in his art. But my comment then was that Strindberg was like an early Bronze Age pervert type of guy.
Yes. And like with these masters, Nietzsche could be seen, Freud, basically his ideas of psychoanalysis, even though like it's harmful. I mean, it's destructive in terms of a Christian perspective. In many ways, like his ideas were that society, like the books from Society and Its Discontent, it can only function if people suppress their sexual urges. That's where all the energy comes from, and people have to consciously suppress and sublimate, as he would say, their sexual urges for us to have a functional society, and that's very important to help people do that. So he wanted to help people sort of do the no-fap stuff, and he was very, it was very important for him to do semen retention. So that, in a sense, could be a little bit right-wing. Karl Marx, not so right-wing, maybe just in terms of like the sheer kind of brutality of Marxism. And the pure Marxism, that they are just interested in revolution and just taking power from people, and not in any kind of wishy-washy, feel-good stuff. It's just pure materialism.
Sure, but I would never accept that the right would ever be about pure destruction. I think that's where it like Marxism goes wrong in that sense. You could say that some of the analysis is maybe correct. I'm not sure if I'd even grant him that. But I'd be wary of mentioning Marx as right wing in any way when all they want to do is destroy.
I mean, from the point where the left is right now, you look at these old school tankies. And they come off as just being really macho, right? In that sense. But like, I like to think of the new left as like they're sort of synthesizing all of these ideas to the point where we're getting into Wilhelm Reich and some of these other people, where it's like, we're going to have the revolution, but it's not going to be a revolution against the capitalists. It's going to be a revolution against the patriarchy and the sexually oppressive class. And everybody's going to be coomers. And they bring in like the Nietzschean aristocracy, that everybody's going to be an aristocrat who can do art and coom every day. And we're just going to overcome and have like, and then like, it's like mixing, Jägermeister with tequila, with like energy drink, with every, it's just this incredibly toxic mix that they have, where you end up with like either gay space, fully automated communism.
I was going to say, I think that's the main sort of anti-right wing point is that removal and destruction of barriers or what should you say, I guess areas or I can't quite put
boundaries,
into words right now. Boundaries, I guess, is the word. Yes.
I guess
that anyone can be anything, etc.
By the way, speaking of boundaries, boundary dissolution is a very often used term in psychedelic culture. But what you said about art there just reminded me. Might just add this for while you're at it. Abstract expressionism was hyped a lot in the U.S. At least from the 50s, maybe 40s. People like Jackson Pollock, and Pollock, of course, had CIA connections. And the CIA started a group called, I wrote it down here, the Cultural Congress of Freedom. And they were funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, by the Rockefeller family. And so this was kind of a capitalist institution, really, but they were spreading abstract expressionism. And, well, it's quite subversive, obviously, and it had ramifications for what came later in the 60s. So
Yes.
just wanted to add that.
A bit of a final point on the Marxism thing, I think, or the tanky thing you mentioned, Ludwig. I don't know if it's the fact that they're, old school leftists. I think it's more like an artifact of, you talked about, the thing about reading books from before 1945. I think it's just a case of that. Anything that's from before the Boomer Truth regime seems reactionary by comparison.
Yes.
That's sort of my take on it.
Or they could mature into like national Bolsheviks to the point where they are kind of right wing. But getting back to like we talked about in the first slide here, you have people who are trying to, I see this so much on the right, whether it's Jordan Peterson or somebody else, trying to categorize, okay, well, I mean, where does this leftism come from? Is it Marcuse, what somebody talks about, or Adorno or something? And I think they'll point to, well, Adorno said that jazz was degenerate, and Marcuse only wanted to kind of remove the corporate hegemony media, and Horkheimer just wanted to do this, and Foucault only talked about like prison reform. I'm sorry, I'm really like simplifying it here, but they can never really sort of pin anybody down as like, this is the guy where it seems like everything stems from.
Right.
But now we're getting to the next slide here as to who is like the crown prince of the new left, in my opinion.
Right.
there we go.
Here we go.
The man
I have to mention, I did not know who Wilhelm Reich is, and we have learned, as we talked about a bit, he was seemingly a student of Freud. And I've learned a lot about Freud in my time during school, etc., but I never heard about Wilhelm Reich. So this week has pretty much been like, after you sent me his Wikipedia article, has been me like reading a part of his Wikipedia article and like messaging you, Ludwig, about what the hell, who is this guy?
It's very difficult. Like, this is a real person who I think was really more influential in like the new left than anybody else. If you were to like, okay, you take a position that the new left has now, like say like, okay, transgender children, would this historical person have supported transgender children? And Marcuse would never have supported that, or Foucault would never have supported this or that. Well, like, I mean, with this guy, just checks all the boxes. It doesn't matter what
probably
stupid,
did it. Put him in his fucking masturbation boxes or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, okay, I don't even know where to start with him. We could just look at the thing is that he is not. He's not a dumb guy. I think he's just sort of a smart guy who just was a little bit crazy and who went progressively down a rabbit hole. Maybe he had some syphilis or some kind of degenerative disease that was never diagnosed.
I mean, to me, this is when I talked about sort of the Wild West of science and psychoanalysis in the 1900s. This is the guy I'm thinking of now, like someone who was just allowed to go on a rampage, basically, in terms of like developing all of these basically insane theories and do all kinds of experiments.
You must remember that he wasn't completely free to do it. He had to move around a lot, and he was eventually thrown in jail, and he died in jail. So people were not happy with this stuff.
No, but there was a point that he did this for a long time before anyone really took notice of him.
Oh, yes.
I remember reading something about like it wasn't until he had lived in America for a long time before anyone really started challenging him. And I mean, at that point, we were he had already constructed his boxes. The accumulators, yeah.
The Orgone farm. But even before, like, when you talk about it, because this guy is old, right? And like when the mid-century Germans were burning books, like his books were on top pile. I can guarantee you that a lot of the stuff that he had written in like the early 1930s, 1920s. Probably. I mean, you can just click on the link there where it says author, and you can see his bibliography. So we can start just going down the list there. I mean, it's just it's quite interesting. So then we have okay, this is where he starts off, like the geniality and the theory and therapy of neurosis. So okay, like the function of the first orgasm, basically the retitle. Then he goes, okay, the invasion of compulsory sex morality, the character analysis, mass psychology of fascism, the sexual revolution. Have you heard that before? I mean, like they talked about the sexual revolution in the 60s. I mean, he wrote a book 30 years before that's literally called The Sexual Revolution, that just describes exactly what was going to happen here. Mm-hmm. So it's like the bioelectrical investigations of sexuality and anxiety, Bion experiments, the function of the orgasm, discovery of Orgone, Volume 1, the cancer biopathy, discovery of Orgone, Volume 2, Listen Little Man.
In these two, this is where he posits that this Orgone stuff could cure cancer. Is that it?
Yes. I don't even know where to start. Like, I mean, Listen Little Man, it's just like this booklet where he's just salty, like he's just lashing out at everybody, the critics that he has. And I mean, he goes into like the murder of Christ, the Einstein affair, contact with space, the sex politics essays. So what idea didn't he have? If you just go back to the slide again, I'll try to explain, at least from our perspective, like his central ideas here. I wasn't kidding in the last slide when I talked about the kind of masters of suspicion synthesis, because this guy was a Marxist, but he was also a psychoanalyst, meaning that he had to take then Freud's ideas and synthesize with Karl Marx's ideas to the point where the oppressive class is not fundamentally the capitalist. The oppressive class is like the sexually repressive patriarchy that is sort of oppressing people through the sexual repression that is making people anxious. That's like the source of all the psychological ailments that we have, is our hang-ups around sex. And the revolution is not going to happen through overthrowing of the proletariat.
In the words of the illustrious Charlemagne on Twitter, what separates us from Russia in the East is the amount of cum that we have.
Well, it's true. I mean, because his version of kind of leftism, for me, it just perfectly maps onto everything. The sexual revolution is what he came like. Okay, we need not a capital revolution, not a proletariat revolution. We need the sexual revolution. Some of the grounding for this is that he sees the utopia, in a sense, not as like the gay space communism, but as a kind of matriarchy, where there is this YouTube channel that I recommend people subscribe to. I think it's called Russell Walter, this Australian video essayist, who has a video on this exact thing, and he describes it a lot more in detail. But Reich's vision was basically like a type of matriarchy, like this kind of prehistory historical communist society where the woman is basically worshipped. Like this was, before people understood the idea of semen and how semen actually contributes to producing or fertilizing an egg. So you have communism in the sense that people believe that women just produce children. Men don't have anything to do with it. So women are kind of goddesses. They produce children, and everybody shares in raising these children. And there's no
children just happen.
Yeah, they just happen because they have orgies, right? Everybody just has access to everybody else. All of their neuroses are cured because they're having sex all the time, and there's no private property because males don't have any idea that anything belongs to them. The idea of we're really getting to the root here, like the deep, deep roots of this left-right conflict, where like his sort of leftist utopia is basically, what is patriarchy? Patriarchy is saying like, this is my child, this is my son, because my sperm produced it. That is patriarchy. And then inheritance, like, having private property. This is my property that I give
Didn't
to
you
my
include
son.
like a dichotomy slide
Yes,
thing here?
it's yeah, we could skip down to it if you want to.
And we can go back because I
we can
think
go
that's
back to
relevant.
it if you think it's a relevant slide here.
Here.
Right. This is like I said, there's the table for the sex. It's from Sex and History. It's from two books. I found it through Robert Antal Wilson and the book Isha Rising, where Robert Antal Wilson is really more of a popularizer. He didn't have that many ideas of his own. He is more trying to he's like a Neil deGrasse Tyson of the New Left, basically trying to explain these ideas in simple terms. So here he contrasts two societies. You have the Patrist society and the Matrist society. It's just a fancy way of saying patriarchy and matriarchy. So with the Patrist society, you have a restrictive attitude towards sex, limitation of freedom for women seen as inferior and sinful, chastity more valued than welfare, politically authoritarian, conservative, against innovation, distrust of research, enquiry, inhibition, fear of spontaneity, deep fear of homosexuality, sex differences maximized, dress code, in the parentheses there, asceticism, fear of pleasure, and a father religion. So the father religion is basically the sky daddy. That's like the atheist like to talk, oh, the sky daddy, you believe in the sky daddy. But there is a sort of deeper root to it. That
There's something to it. I mean, Christianity is
Yeah.
a sort of masculine religion in that sense.
Yes.
It's a patriarchal religion.
And that's easy to forget here. I mean, the recent stream on Academic Agent, where we were talking about the pagan critiques of Christianity and Christianity as being like this meek kind of feminine religion, they're forgetting that this religion is inherently patriarchal.
Uh-huh.
It's just absolutely a patriarchal kind of like male psychology created religion. But
Yes.
It's easy when you get lost in a lot of these weird dichotomies that we're using to separate left from right to miss that point.
I'll also add that this dichotomy here is quite in the favor of the matrist one, because everything on the left is fear of something.
Oh, yes. I mean, it's cope,
when
basically.
It's like, it's not that it's not that you're supposed to fear pleasure. It's that you're supposed to, have control over it. So it's taking basically the old way of thinking in terms of the Marcus Aurelius or any Christian thinkers where it's about, freedom is freedom from sin, and basically turning it on its head and saying, oh, well, it's bad, right?
Yes, and of course, I mean, these authors are, New Left kind of liberal progressives, and all of their theories are, they're always very pro-progressive. Usually, whether it's Wilhelm Reich, it's very explicitly that way. But we go back to Timothy Leary, it's a little bit less overt, but it's still kind of implicitly accepted that, like, this kind of matriarchal society and the kind of they marry this idea of the matriarchal society and progressiveness in a sort of strange way. So I'm just going to read the matrist list here. So in the matrist society, there's a permissive attitude towards sex, freedom for women accorded high status, welfare more valued than chastity, politically democratic, progressive, revolutionary, no distrust of research, spontaneity, exhibition, deep fear of incest, sex differences minimized, hedonism, pleasure welcomed, mother religion. So now we're talking about Mother Earth, right?
Yes.
So that's the dichotomy. You have Mother Earth, or you have like the sky father. That is the matriarchal and the patriarchal concept. And of course, to me, this list is just total cope, a lot of this stuff.
I mean, I'd say that the matrist list is more, in many ways, more accurate to the world we live in today.
Yes. And so they wanted this world. Like, this is the New Left, basically. What their project was basically to create more of like this matriarchal society and not to create the proletarian revolution. But the idea that these
Seamuson in the chat says the land whale or the Giga Chad, and in a sense you are correct, Seamuson, but if I'm gonna be a Jungian for a second, these two are archetypes that do fit. I mean, the Giga Chad is the father religion. He is the patriarch, and the land whale is in many ways the consuming mother, which is the society that we have built today.
Yeah.
The Shodan.
I'm just going to point out here what I think is factual and what I think is just total cope. The idea of like no distrust of research, that you could find matriarchal societies that produces a lot of science throughout history. I don't know where this comes from. This is just like pure cope. I have no idea how this is supposed to work, that you have like these matriarchal societies that have orgies and people are just relaxing and they're not doing anything. Yeah, they're doing a lot of research. Yeah. They're creating the Turing machine. Yeah, no, they're not doing that. The idea that they had a deep fear of incest, no, they didn't. Most societies in history did not have a fear of incest. The church, the European Catholic Church, was, I think, one of the first institutions to make incest illegal. I mean, it is still legal in most, in a lot, most countries, as far as I understand, at least to a certain extent.
It's one of the counter jihad thing being brought up today about like child marriages in the Middle East, etc.
So these, and even the stuff like progressive revolutionary, how this society is going to be revolutionary, I think it would just keep people stuck in the kind of same Coomer cycle like we're getting into now, where it's like the barbarian horde just has to come in and take over. I don't see how this society is going to progress in any direction. Like, I mean, you could have this kind of permissiveness and
there's the inherent way of viewing things and setting these two up against each other by saying conservative against an innovation and progressive revolutionary. You're assigning value to these as against innovation being something inherently good, and revolutions being something inherently good, when that's not necessarily true at all.
No, but I mean, I think for the people reading these types of books, this is just preaching to the choir for them.
Well, sure.
So just to mention, while we're on this slide here, Robert Anton Wilson and I think Timothy Leary, to a lesser extent, talk about sort of things like circumcision. How, like in these patriarch societies, they're going to use circumcision as a type of like mechanism to reinforce the patriarchy, because they get more suspicious about sex. Like sex becomes less pleasurable, so they're going to have like more semen retention, and it also creates a sort of distrust imprint where people will become more hostile when like the first formative experience they have is a circumcision. So he's very on point with that. It's like one of the steps to make society more matriarchal is to remove circumcision of young boys. And this is going to be, I think, painful in a lot of our circles, because I think, I used to follow Stefan Molyneux quite a bit. And one of his big things is that if we can create the libertarian society if we remove circumcision from boys and have more breastfeeding. But the theory from these new left people is really quite the opposite. It's like, by doing that, you're actually creating more of a matriarchy. You're not going to create this libertarian, Ancapistan.
That's interesting, but I mean, there are cultures that have never done circumcision. I mean, ours included, Ludwig and Fingal.
Yes.
And would you categorize, historically, of course, our culture as a patrist or a matrist? I mean, considering it's been pagan.
I don't know. I mean, it's not always a hard.
This is a whole different thing, right? Yeah. But
it's. I mean, it's probably more matrist now, and I think.
Obviously.
I think our culture is less patrist than, say, somewhere in the Middle East, right?
Oh, obviously, but I'm thinking more historically. Yeah. I mean, that's
I would say
a formula. Does circumcision actually impact it that much?
Yeah. I was also thinking about, I was going to say historically, I'm sure it was very masculine driven. And also we call Norway Fedreland, fatherland, as opposed to motherland. I don't know the relevance of that, but it's something I've thought about before.
I think that's part of the nation state sort of way of thinking.
Probably.
Because I think fatherland and Mother Earth are two very different concepts.
For sure, but I mean, Russia is Mother Russia,
fair enough. Yeah.
I don't have any answers to this. I just considered it before. But yeah, go on, Lerik.
No, that's an interesting thought. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to go back to now that we've seen this one, we could go back to Wilhelm Reich and try to finish up some of the kookiness that's going on there. So we go through the ideas that cover the sexual revolution, and then we get to the mass psychology of fascism. And people talk about, the authoritarian personality as like the premier book of this kind of like denazification, but the mass psychology of fascism is really that book. It was written, I think, almost 20 years earlier, and the thesis of that book is basically the NoFap to fascism pipeline. That's the entire idea, is that people become fascist if they don't coom enough. So you need to have more orgasms, and that's like the best de-radicalization agent for societies, is to just have more orgasms, more cooming. And like this was taken up by a lot of these, new leftists, and I don't know, it's kind of true. It's kind of accurate, because you see it in these magazines, and you have these thoughts like, oh, the Rolling Stone is talking about the connection between this NoFap movement and and the only takes that you get on it is like these sort of Michael Jones, sexuality is a form of political control. When you see that in Huxley's Brave New World as well, it's a form of political control. It's not just a form of political control. And you talk about Ramallah and Israel and whatever. Like it is like cooming or not cooming. That's like, for people like this, it's the core issue separating the right from the left. If
fair enough.
Issue,
I mean, but I think
like
when we say that, it's important to talk about like it's about like societal promiscuity, or promiscuity as a social pillar. It's not that you're never allowed to have sex with your wife. It's about breaking down.
I'll be quite honest and say that they may be onto something there, actually. I mean, there's quite a lot of anti-coomerism, and that's a good thing.
But I agree. Like
right.
Anti-coomerism in the societal sense. I mean, that's where we're drawing the line between the left and the right here.
Yeah,
it's Tinder versus no Tinder in a sense.
Yes, but I think even with like you said, you're supposed to have a wife and have sex with your wife, but even within that context, you would still not use you'd still not be very frequent, have a lot of frequent sex, because your wife would get pregnant, right? And that would put some blockers on the amount of sex that you would be having if you're not using contraceptives that are very recent. And like say like these other idea, like tantra and these sort of tantric experiences where you're having an orgasm, but you're kind of like blocking yourself from pardon my language here, like you're trying to block the semen coming out here. I think Evola has like a book on where some of that stuff is mentioned. So like this stuff is like very right wing. The idea that you need to control, it's not just like, okay, it doesn't mean like you're never cooming, but it means that you really need to control sex. Like you need to have like a very conscious approach to what you're doing and who you're doing it with, and what goal does it have, and how does it further other type of idealistic goals. It's like sex is not a goal in itself.
Yes, if you're interested in more of Evola's thoughts on these, he has two books. It's Eros and the Mysteries of Love. No, sorry, I think that's the only one. Let me see here. I haven't read this one because I couldn't get it when I was looking for it, but maybe I can be able to, because I don't want the paperbacks. No, it's Eros and the Mysteries of Love, but sometimes it's called The Metaphysics of Sex. So there you go.
Yep. It's not for polite conversation.
No, certainly not. It's very esoteric as well, from what I've skimmed on it on the PDFs.
May I just interject? Are you familiar with the Kinsey reports, either of you?
No.
Tell us.
They were written by what's his first name? Alfred Kinsey, from 48 and 53. I used to work at an independent bookshop, and for some reason we had these lying around, like really fat volumes. And I believe it was in the 1948 edition. He he laid forth a 7-point Kinsey scale. So instead of 3 categories, heterosexual, bisexual, and homosexual, sexuality had a 7-point system. So, I mean, this goes way back, this sort of thing. It's the same era that you were talking about, so. Anyway.
Yep.
So is the implication here that this is the start of the 72 genders thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Basically. Unlimited genders, why not?
Yeah, I mean, we can look at pronouns later, actually, in the presentation. But having some fun with this stuff, when we get beyond these ideas that have this sex politics and the Marxist Freudian synthesis and these practices that he's running, when his brain cancer starts to become more severe, and I don't mean that literally, he just gets crazier as he gets older. He starts getting into the idea of orgonomy, which is really taking the idea of Sigmund Freud's idea of the libido, that it's this energy, this sexual energy that's stored up in the body and that you store up with semen retention, and really thinking of it not as just a symbolic psychological concept. It's an actual energy that you could measure in kilowatts, like electricity or something like that. And if it's an actual physical energy, it can also be harnessed to do other things than to power a machine, for instance. So you could so his project is then how to harness people's orgone energy to either heal themselves or to power different machines.
He was also convinced it was visible under certain conditions.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can see these pictures of him where he builds these kind of chambers. You have to sit in a small, get undressed and sit in a little chamber for 3 hours. Where you could build up orgone energy, and that concentrated orgone could then try to cure your ailments. I mean, that's where we're getting into cloud busting, because it just gets crazier and crazier. He then had the idea to try to build a large cannon. It's like this huge contraption. It looks like something that would be like a war machine, like a small tank that is basically has these wires and tubes to concentrate this orgone energy into the tubes, so that you could fire the tubes at control at certain points in the sky and just basically create rain whenever you want to. So you're trying to use this orgone energy to control weather. If you click on the so at the point where he lived in Norway, we can look
have
at
the
his,
link here. Yeah, we can look at the
accumulator
accumulator and the cloud busters. Let's see here. Let me open the share screen. Let's go.
There is a Kate Bush track by the name of Cloud Busting, by the way.
Yes, it's about this.
Yeah.
So I mean,
here we have the orgone accumulator. So you'd sit in here, and I don't know, it would harness the section. I don't understand how this works. I'm sorry.
He is a mad scientist. He's basically this kind of new leftist mad scientist guy. But if you just scroll up here, Walrus, and look at the contents table, and just read from the top to the bottom here. I mean, just trying to explain this to people in a polite
early life,
conversation.
childhood, death of parents, 1919-1930, Vienna. Undergraduate studies, introduction to Freud, first marriage, graduation, the Vienna Ambulatorium, der triebhafte Charakter, which I don't know what that means in English, orgastic potency, rest cure in Switzerland, the sexual political movement, the function of the orgasm, visit to the Soviet Union, Germany, Denmark, and Sweden, Verlag für Sexualpolitik, character analysis, end of his first marriage, vegetotherapy, which is what? I don't quite remember what that was. And then from 1934 to 1939, he lived in Norway, where he studied bioelectricity. He did bion experiments. He met some opposition to his ideas, and he, if I remember correctly, he married his. He did not marry, but he had several flings with quite young Norwegian women.
Who'd imagine, right?
Yes.
But I mean, with these types of people, there's like two psychological profiles you could think of. You could think that this is like one of these people who read Aftenposten, like this kind of bourgeois person who has all these liberal opinions and talks about sexual liberation, but their life is actually like the standard heterosexual co-partnership. Like they have like this implicit Protestant morality, and they're actually kind of prudish, but they talk like they try to virtue signal about this kind of sexual liberation and feminism to seem like they're in the in crowd, but they're actually quite boring. But with this guy, it's like, you know, he's totally true to his stuff. Like when he says that, he thinks that having cooming as much as possible and having unprotected sex and multiple partners, he lived that to the absolute extent that you could possibly do. Like there was no, it was not fake. You can at least say that.
No.
By
Then
the
he
way,
moves to
sorry, I have to wonder why he would leave Austria in 1934.
Yeah, I wonder why.
After releasing that book in 33, apparently, The Mass Psychology of Fascism. So, yeah. Anyway.
Then he moves into teaching. He has a second marriage. He invents the Orgone school. He does experiments with Einstein. He gets arrested by the FBI. Funnily enough, he gets arrested because the FBI thought he was another, like someone else. There's a different Wilhelm Reich they were trying to arrest. So he spends quite a few days in jail surrounded by fascists in America who hates him, and he fears for his life. And then he gets sick with something quite mild, and he gets moved to like a medical prison.
They were trying to get the Wilhelm Reich who said the N-word or something.
Probably. So then, like after a couple of days, and he goes on a hunger strike or something, the FBI goes like, "Oh, you're wrong, Wilhelm," and then just kind of releases him, which is quite insane.
So
then
he
purchases
two Reichs. I wonder who was the third one.
Yeah. Then he purchases Orgone, which is a farm. He purchased and then renamed to Orgone. Then he has some legal problems from the times of 1947 to 57. There's the Brady articles and the FDA, which is the first time he starts to meet some real opposition. Then there's the Orgonomic Infant Research Center, which I'm not even sure I want to click on.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you know, well, they wouldn't want this introduced to children. Do you think that's what they wanted? Yeah, with this guy, that's exactly what he wanted.
Yeah. And so then he gets divorced, and it's all downhill from here because then it's the Cloudbusters. Then he gets an injunction. Then he's chasing UFOs. He's held in contempt of court. There's book burnings of his books. He's imprisoned, and then his death, finally.
So, I mean, the UFO stuff was basically he was getting paranoid, and he was trying to, him and his son were trying to run around on the Orgone ranch to shoot down UFOs with the Orgone, like, Cloudbuster machine.
Yes.
I mean, you could have a field day with this Wikipedia. Every single content point here is funny.
Yeah.
Like, it's all
because you click on it.
Crazy.
Yeah, you click on it, and like something like... the Vienna Ambulatorium. It doesn't sound that funny, but I swear it's probably a funny story behind it. So,
I mean, even his like early. I mean, yeah, of course, I assume like this just implicitly understand, but like his ethnic background is exactly what you would think. And
what I'm telling
like
the
childhood,
that when you're ready, you won't have to check her.
You won't have to. But I mean, his childhood even is like this story where his mother has like they have this live-in tutor that his mother is just having sex with at night, and he is just witness to that, and then he tells his dad, so his dad kills his mom, and then he has to move away from like it is all like this sort of. If you made like this. You know, this could be like a Netflix show or some kind of HBO show. And after the show, it's like they say based on a true story, and you're like, yeah, sure. You know, I wouldn't even have believed it if that's what
Depending
it is.
Depending on who does it, it could like either be a serious show or possibly a very good comedy movie. if you just go full on with the camp.
I wonder why. I wonder why. But like all these directors out there, and they who know about this,
why
they know who he is. Why no one wants to, touch on this?
No one made a movie about this guy.
We got so many, movies about all these things, like these quirky politicians who did like one wrong thing in their life, and they're just leaving people like him on the shelf. I wonder if there's some connection here. I can't.
Lupus Persona says that he thinks it's actually on TV. That would be interesting to have a look. Actually,
we do at least. Oh, sorry, Wallace.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say we do at least have the music video for that Kate Bush song, and it's about Reich and his son. Apparently, his son really appreciates that the music video is with Donald Sutherland in the role of Reich. Anyway, it's just it's kind of irrelevant, but I just saw it by happenstance a couple of days ago. So
you see, I mean, just as an aside here, Kate Bush is like an absolute treasure. There are some of these British musicians that are just absolutely like phenomenal, say like David Bowie. But you have some other ones that I like that like within this brand of progressive pop. I don't mean like progressive as politically, but it's like artistic pop. We have like Peter Gabriel, for instance, and Kate Bush, and some of these people who come from these aristocratic families, and they have this phenomenal like artistic and musical talent. But they apparently knew about this guy, surprisingly. Like the sort of the elite knew who this guy was, and that's why I say that he's probably been more influential than you think, because like the people in the know of things, they knew exactly who he was and the ideas that he professed. But it's not for like public consumption. This is that's why I called it like the esoteric new left, because it's sort of hidden from the masses. We can skip to the next character now. Oh yeah, good old Timmy.
You can go off on Timothy Leary. I don't know much about him, so I'm gonna keep listening, but I'm going to get some water, so I'll be gone for a little bit.
Okay. Just a minute. I don't have a super kind of in-depth knowledge of his entire life. There are documentaries, like plenty of documentaries of his life floating around on YouTube. He was a clinical psychologist who's actually very accredited until the point where he sort of discovered psilocybin and tries to sort of, he discovered psychedelics, and he started to believe that this is the path to sort of new revolution. Like he's just sort of found the next technology. He described himself as like he's going to be the new Socrates or the new Martin Luther. That the sort of psychedelic mushrooms or LSD there is going to be like the new printing press, or the sort of the absolute thing that brings humanity into this next level of consciousness, or this kind of next level of development. But of course, I mean, at the time, this was it was very controversial, and he became a sort of like public enemy number one, as it says down there in the miscellaneous section. Richard Nixon referred to him as the most dangerous man in America. He was in and out of jail for most of his life, in contact with the CIA, and he keeps basically his entire life is, after the point of the psychedelic experience, it's dedicated to this kind of like psychedelic culture, trying to get people into using psychedelics, getting young people into using it. That's the psychedelic revolution there. He's known for the saying tune in, turn on, drop out, and the idea that you should just kind of like you screw all this sort of war stuff, screw getting a job, don't think about getting married or sort of family, or trying to be in this kind of rigid hierarchy. You should just try to drop acid and try to tune out of it and just enjoy your experience, be a hippie. I mean, I think a lot of the hippie stuff wouldn't have been possible without him, because he was not a baby boomer. He was not in that generation. He was very kind of into his 40s and 50s by the time that the hippie movement rolled around. But he was more of a guidance counselor for these hippies to create the kind of like hedonistic worldview. He is a similar character to Alan Watts, who I assume some people will be familiar with. Watts is a character whose reputation has been a lot more protected than I think it should. because he is really kind of the same type of character who's just a little bit more sophisticated. Wingle, you're probably familiar with Watts.
For sure. I would say there are, you're not wrong about that, but there are clear differences, I'd say. I mean, Watts was much less obviously, anyway, or much less at all proselytizing about drugs. Timothy Leary didn't keep it secret at all, but Watts is more about interpreting Eastern traditions and popularizing it for a Western audience, which, you know, a lot of Eastern, a lot of those thoughts become very watered down in the West, and sort of New Age, you know, a lot of it is meant for the consumption of housewives or whatever. But yeah, I mean, you see all this sort of symbology on soap-like items, household items now. But getting off track here, I think it's worth mentioning that Leary was a research scientist up until, I think, 1963 at Harvard, where he actually researched psychedelic compounds, in particular mushrooms. And by the way, LSD was first synthesized in 1948. I'm wearing my Albert Hoffman t-shirt right now, by the way. He was the guy who first synthesized it. So
yeah,
I guess I'm showing my freak credentials.
It's interesting. But the reason that I connect him to Alan Watts is that they have different sort of outward personas in terms of what they were known for, but they hung in the same circles and they knew each other personally, and they were both like taking the same drugs. They were selling each other drugs. And like the type of character that someone like Timothy Leary is, it's very much the same personality types as a Wilhelm Reich, but like just a little bit less crazy, which doesn't say much. Yeah, because he was pretty wild as well.
For sure, and there are, I can't corroborate this, but I think it's pretty clear that there are CIA connections going way back with Leary, at least. And it's kind of funny, actually, with Alan Watts, because he was an alcoholic and he smoked cigarettes and stuff. Now, some people criticize him for that, but if you look deeper into Zen, it's not necessarily hypocritical at all, but that's another track we won't get into. But
I mean, the point is that
it wasn't all about psychedelics all the time. It was more about the mysticism.
Yep. But the type of personality that you have here, it's like it's really is this sort of high risk person who's more kind of hedonistic, interested in experiences, high risk, high openness, promiscuity as well. I mean, that's the sort of risk factor here, because like people like Alan Watts and Timothy Leary they were really sort of promiscuous in a period before birth control was mainstreamed. Meaning that, I mean, you could go around and have these flings and you just risk having kids all over the place. Which
Does that
really
mean you're based?
Yeah, it's the PUA.
I'm just joking.
It's the PUAs of the previous generation. But I mean, the reason that Alan Watts was an alcoholic was that he had to pay all these alimony payments. He had just so many kids all over the place from like all this sort of like unprotected sex that he had with students that he had to do constant lecturing and touring like a rock star all the time, and he couldn't handle the pressure. So he had to smoke and drink, and he basically just kind of died from alcohol abuse and rotten liver at 59, I think.
Yeah, poor guy.
Because he couldn't sort of handle it. I mean, Timothy Leary actually did better health-wise because he went to prison. He actually said that like prison was very healthy for him because he could just be in his cell and read books and exercise, and he didn't have to do all this crazy stuff, even though he broke out of prison.
Are you saying that boundaries helped him become a better person?
Yeah, maybe. I don't think he took the lesson there, but it's he is. I mean, I make him sound like he's sort of like this hateable character, but he's actually very funny. I think if you were around him, you'd probably like him. He's like this very approachable, open guy that you could talk to ideas about, and like this kind of old school liberal type where nothing is off the table. You can discuss anything you like, and he'd probably be funny, get into hijinks. I just put in a mention there that he was the actually, I think he was one of the first people to use gender neutral pronouns in literature. If you click on the link there, they have this encyclopedia of gender neutral pronouns.
Let me see here.
Yeah.
It led me to something strange when I opened it earlier, so just be careful here.
It might be corrupted.
Here we
if
go.
It is.
Oh, it worked out. It just, for some reason, it didn't work on my phone earlier. Here we go. Okay, the here, self, etc. The Z, the Zers, the yeah. Okay.
It's the she with like a slash. Basically, that's his invention, or the.
He invented that. Okay.
Yes. So, but that was before all of these check your pronouns people, right? So, but this is just to show what, like, he was a pioneer, basically, because, like, not just for these kind of leftists, but like for all of California and this type of the American culture machine in terms of the agenda points and the stuff that they would end up falling into. He did it first. All of it. So there's not that much of interest here, but I just wanted to show it for fun.
I've got a few of his books at hand here, by the way. Like I said earlier, I haven't really done much prep, didn't have the time, but I've got one from 1994 here, which is very focused on the cyber culture that we talked about earlier, going into cyber sex. And it's kind of funny because it's from 1994, of course, so there's like dial-up connections and well, no, I don't even want to get into it. Like I'm hesitating because it's so degenerate, but there's a lot of
I'm gonna plug the dial-up directly into my ass.
Yeah. That's actually the kind of language like I want to download your ex and
Jesus Christ.
But yeah, I mean, he was sort of ahead of his time. Even like he was probably the first person to think about, using the internet for erotic purposes, and that's kind of the main use of it now. But he was very excited about new innovations and wanted to the internet and the cyberspace is going to come up and look at all these opportunities. So for these Californians in the 1970s and 1960s, the exciting new horizons that were coming up was basically, computers was one, and the other one was then basically this kind of like psychonaut space, this sort of psychedelic space, and even parapsychology. If you get into like mind reading and telekinesis, pyrokinesis, it sounds so ridiculous now, but like the CIA had their hands all over it. You have this movie that's called The Men Who Stare at Goats with George Clooney.
Very funny movie, by the way.
It's really about that. It's no joke. Like the CIA spent a lot of money trying to research parapsychology and figure out how they could, try to mind control and read the minds of the communists. I mean, you talk about the CIA connections, Vingel. They seem to have their fingers all over the place. They would really be interested in a guy like this who's like this kind of psychedelic expert, how they can use this knowledge to control people.
Yeah, I have to wonder what came first. I just picked up the psychedelic experience here. I think it's from 1963, the year he was fired from Harvard. I can't quite tell right now, but it says here that his first experience was in 1957 in Mexico while taking mescaline, probably. And I guess he was a research scientist already by then, but like what came first, this experience or the CIA connection, I don't know, because I've heard, among other things, that I think it's called Gordon Wasson or something. He was basically the starting point of all this. He went to South America, and I've always known him as an ethnobotanist or whatever, but apparently he was actually a CIA operative. And Time magazine ran this sort of advertising spread for magic mushrooms, and this was way back in the 50s. So, I mean, I was psyoped by this sort of culture so early that it's sort of incredible to me how deep the intelligence agency connections go. But yeah, there you have it.
Yeah, we could spend a lot of time on this guy, but just to show kind of a little bit how goofy and sort of funny he was, and how sort of avant-garde, you could click on the question everything link, so we could watch a little bit of that video thing that he put out in his earlier age.
This one's a trip.
It is like a sort of brain reprogramming video that you can watch.
This is one of those, if you are prone to epileptic seizures, you should probably look away kind of videos. Let's see here.
Warning.
In the Socratic sense, the medium is the message. The words you use, the modes of communication you use, determine the realities you inhabit. Most of our lives, most of us live in realities determined by others, imprinted in our brains by education, by religion, by politics, by the authorities. McLuhan said, if you want to change your mind, change the medium, change the words you use, change the mode of communication. If you change the medium, you change yourself, you change your society.
Yeah, I think he's, it's not that he's saying anything wrong here, I think.
It speaks for itself. I mean, he just kind of explained his entire project in like a few minutes there. That's why I wanted exactly that.
This as well.
Yeah.
Whoops, sorry, I accidentally removed you from the stream. No, as you said, it's we're hitting on the other part of the Brave New World versus 1984 dichotomy here, and that the 1984 approach was changing the language, changing the medium, and thus changing the mind of people, and so he's attacking that part of it, I'd say.
Yeah, no, it's a lot about this new left individualism here. It's that I don't have to be, subordinate to religious realities or traditional realities. I create my own reality. So I just detach myself from all of this kind of social conditioning, and I just, my reality is like my property. So I'm just going to create it for myself, and that was sort of the idea of his project, so I could just use my own reality for my own hedonism. Like it is almost solipsistic, if people are familiar with that term.
Well, then it's rather useless, isn't it?
I don't know. Maybe, I mean, not in the sense that nothing else exists, but in the sense that you kind of just have to. You should just try to consciously try to change the way you perceive the world to be the most beneficial for yourself. It's a very strange idea. It's really counter to the thinking that you see in the dissident right sphere. That thinking is very rooted in hierarchy and tradition and boundaries and categories. And this
might be
thinking is
too deep to get what he's saying here.
So, but it's not going to stick on the first try. You might have to do repeat listens or just think about it more. Yeah. But I think we can move on to the next parts of the presentation.
Here's the good stuff. While Vingel is away, we can watch the because he found the British troops testing LSD video. We can have a look at that for a moment.
Run it.
The drug was administered in a drink of water given at the start of each day's exercise. 25 minutes later, the first effects of the drug became apparent. The men began to relax and to giggle. But this man was more seriously affected and had to be removed from the exercise. After 35 minutes, one of the radio operators had become incapable of using his set, and the efficiency of the rocket launcher team was also very impaired. 10 minutes later, the attacking section had lost all sense of urgency. Notice the bunching and indecision as they enter a wood occupied by the enemy. Almost immediately, the section commander tried to use a map to find the location of troop headquarters, and a prisoner's escort had to have the way pointed out to him, although it was in plain sight, 700 yards away over open country. 50 minutes after taking the drug, radio communication had become difficult, if not impossible, but the men are still capable of sustained physical effort. However, constructive action was still attempted by those retaining a sense of responsibility in spite of physical symptoms. But 1 hour and 10 minutes after taking the drug, with one man climbing a tree to feed the birds, the troop commander gave up, admitting that he could no longer control himself or his men. He himself then relapsed into laughter.
That's quite relatable there. So it shows you they actually tried to use it in a simulated combat setting for
Did they actually use a rocket launcher there, or was that a dummy?
No, I'm sure they just used dummy weapons or blanks there. But there's a longer version where you can see them, trying to keep their wits about them and failing hard.
Oh, did you want to say anything here on the...
I think we can just move into it. I wanted to, I mean, for this presentation, I'm just going to talk about LSD. I think it would be way too long. I think we're probably going to go over our regular time anyway with this presentation. But I mean, in sort of our spheres, I'm just putting that in quotes. If you've been on YouTube, you've rubbed shoulders with these ideas, maybe through Jordan Peterson, who's going to talk about this kind of psychedelic, archetypal things, or the kind of therapeutic properties of psychedelics. Joe Rogan is going to hammer on about that stuff constantly.
Yeah, it's been memed quite a lot. I don't watch Joe Rogan, but I know the memes of the DMT stuff. So it's spread quite far.
I mean, like, Joe Rogan is not stupid, but the way that he presents a lot of this stuff is that he's just trying to have a good time. Like, he is usually intoxicated on the show already, so he's not operating at like a full capacity, and he's just, oh bro, I did this, I did DMT 3 times and I saw Brock Lesnar in the window, and like, it's you're not really getting a good academic explanation of how this works. So I wanted to do a bit more of like a presentation of this stuff that's not like complete trash like most of the stuff you see on YouTube that's just about like the fun experience or trying to synthesize a type of experience, or, oh, look at this trippy stuff. It's just like a total matter of fact. Okay, what exactly is this stuff? And not in a deep sort of medical pharmaceutical way, but in a bit of like a let's say, call it a practical introduction for outsiders.
Right.
Just keep sliding. Righto. So I mean, the abbreviation, let's say, I think it is lysergic acid diethylamide or something. I'm not sure how it's even pronounced.
Diethylamine or something.
Diethylamine something. So, I mean, it is like a psychedelic drug or a mind-altering drug. It's different from typically when the drugs people have been exposed to in like a mainstream Western society will be what you call a depressant drug. So it will be, say, alcohol, for instance. So you take in strong painkillers. And what these drugs will typically do is to sort of, they will work as a kind of pain relief. It will slow you down. It will sort of give you like a slower reaction time and remove inhibitions, kind of simplify your mind a little bit. It'll give you a bit more of like you become less aware of things when you take a depressant. With the psychedelic, you have the kind of opposite effect, is that you become more aware of certain things. You get a greater sensitivity. So it's a very different experience. LSD in itself, it's not like a type of, like you see, you have a drug like ecstasy or cocaine that is like a very high dopamine type drug, that it has like this orgasmic feeling to it that will sort of keep you hooked and addicted. This is really more of like a it's like going to an art gallery in a sense. It doesn't have that guarantee that it's going to be a pleasurable experience. And if people are using this to sort of say, "Oh, I'm feeling bad right now," or I'm in pain, and if I take this stuff, then the pain is going to go away, and I'm going to feel good. That's probably not going to happen. That's not how it works. It'll probably make your pain more intense, and if you're thinking about negative things, it'll just be a kind of a type of feedback loop that you're going to put yourself into. But
okay, so it's like a multiplier to whatever.
Yes, it is like an enhancer
on,
or a type of multiplier to what's going on. So if you were to take something and you went to an amusement park, let's say you could take one of these carousels, and I mean, you're an adult, so you're probably not going to find it very exciting or very threatening. But if you would take a certain dosage of this and you would take the same ride, I mean, it would be more stimulating. It would feel a lot more dangerous, even to the point where you would be fearful and maybe start screaming or something. It's not uncommon with people on high doses if they're exposed to things that are unpleasant.
Right.
So
set and setting is often used to describe. Maybe you should be in a comfortable. I'm not saying you should do it, but obviously going out on the town and just like going to a stuffy club or whatever, it's not gonna be I mean, some people do it, but I can't imagine doing that. It should be in a natural environment or something with friends you really trust. So,
say people you trust, or you're in nature, for instance, you're some sort of kind of safe glade or like a park or a forest or something. Let's say, I mean, if Amsterdam would be the place that you could go and not get LSD, but you could get psilocybin. And then you could be able to walk around in the park and have a pleasant experience just looking at trees and flowers, for instance. But I don't want to get too much into it. But the impact that LSD has sort of had on culture, like since the 60s, the Beatles, I guess, is the most famous example, is that they were more of like this standard, like heartthrob, soft kind of rock band. And then they were exposed to psychedelics in the form of LSD, and they started to produce things that were a little bit more artsy, you could say, more experimental. And you see this with, I mean, I'm sure we could just sit here all day and just name artists that have like these, really kind of spacey, experimental music. And, most of it will be connected to some type of psychedelic drug.
I could spend hours just talking about the Beatles, to be honest. So I'm going to try not to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I put in these directors here that are probably, again, with the directors, you could just go on and on. Kubrick, I can't really confirm his usage of it, but like, say, a film like 2001 Space Odyssey, for instance, some of the imagery you see there, particularly towards the end, it's very reminiscent of a type of strong dose kind of hallucinogenic psychedelic experience.
That sequence at the end there is actually extremely impressive. I saw it once on 70mm film, on a new roll of film at the cinema. It was something else. I believe he was. There are two brothers called John and James Whitney who developed that film, experimental film technique, and Kubrick really used that for what it was worth.
So Oliver Stone, I guess he's sort of more of this like sort of leftist filmmaker he's getting more based because he's getting older. And you see it, say, in a movie like Natural Born Killers, it is very inspired by this kind of psychedelic experience. Charlie Kaufman, I mean, his movies, say, like Being John Malkovich, it's not just like you have the psychedelic visuals, but you have a lot of this kind of quote unquote kind of trippy loops and, concepts within concepts and boxes within boxes, and, who's controlling what, and these kind of like questions that sometimes will enter people who are exposed to this. I put a point under entrepreneurship here. So you have the William Fentz has professed to have used this stuff. Steve Jobs was a very sort of strong advocate of it. He said that was one of his the things that kind of tipped him over the edge to live this kind of lifestyle that he did. In Silicon Valley in general, like this is, it is very widespread in California as this kind of like enhancer, artistic enhancer, creativity enhancer. Even people in like the technology and IT sectors that use it in smaller doses because they believe it helps them find creative solutions to
microdosing stuff. Is that it?
That's I mean, with someone like Gates or Jobs, they probably just took one big
I
dose
mean
and
like
just,
the modern version.
But the modern sort of like Bugman LSD is like like, oh, I'm microdosing. I got a new app to help me microdose, and they'll say that that helps them be more creative. I'm not sure about if it's documented to work or not, but it's been this kind of trend that's going on there.
Right.
I know that Steve Jobs used to often ask people who applied for a job if they did acid and stuff. And there's this is going back to the cyber culture bit.
Yep.
There's a lot of connections to the early software development. And I mean, we could take this in many directions.
Well, that's why software is shit now.
Yeah, people don't. But
getting high and writing the software that we're still using today. Yeah.
And it might be worth mentioning that Silicon Valley is one of these sort of, it was obviously created from the ground up just to be Silicon Valley, and Laurel Canyon was similar. That's where a lot of the 60s bands that spread this psychedelic culture into the mainstream, they were from there. And I gotta respect that this is Ludwig's presentation. But that's a really deep rabbit hole of going into like the families that people from the Birds and the Mamas and the Papas and Buffalo Springfield and stuff. They were from this.
This is research I think that our viewers can do in their own time, or maybe we can.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I should
like
dare to do a stream of those things.
Yeah,
it's a huge topic.
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to point out that it's sort of a lot of it is sort of constructed. Even though I love like a lot of that music, like the Birds, it was sort of constructed from the ground up by powers that be. Let's just put it like that way.
Yep. I'm just going to finish up on the point here. I've talked about the usage. So in terms of similar substances that are similar but provide slightly differing experiences, you have the mescaline that Aldous Huxley used. These are the psilocybin, like magic mushroom. That's a much more persistent substance that has been around for, LSD, like Vingel said, was invented in the 1930s, but magic mushroom has basically been around for maybe as long as human beings have been. And there are tribe cultures that use that will sort of use them ritualistically. Ayahuasca is another thing that you see in South America with these tribes that use ayahuasca. You have DMT, that's kind of like a synthesized type of ayahuasca that's a lot shorter but a lot more intense. And there's peyote, that is another like Native American type substance that I think also comes from a cactus. Native Americans are actually allowed legally to grow it on their properties, but not if you're white. You can't prove that you're like 164th Native American. Did I miss anyone, Vingel?
Any substances? Yes. I guess those are the main ones. Mescaline is. I'm getting old, I guess. I seem to recall it's the same substance as peyote. It's the active ingredient.
Yeah, perhaps it is. So I'm just splitting hairs.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure anymore.
Yep. Okay, then I think we could move on to the next slide. So here I wanted to just talk about the dosage.
That is like the most millennial picture I've ever seen.
I wanted to include it. I can't
this.
I can't even vouch for some of these things that you have like more energy and you're less depressed. Like this actually, I can't vouch for that any of this actually works. But this is the stuff that you're gonna see by these like pro drug legalization NGOs. But typically, like you would put these kind of dosages in categories.
Just everything about that person. Sorry.
The socks. The socks,
the bangs, the way
bangs.
she has her scarf, everything. Yeah, the makeup.
Sitting at a modern art pedestal of some
the
sort.
like slight corporate art thing going on, like in front of her face. Ugh. Yeah. Okay, keep going.
It's all there. But quickly, a microdose is. I mean, it's how LSD is administered is typically like it is a liquid that is distilled, and it is administered through, like they would use some type of paper or patches. Like you would see, they would have these papers with the, like, shapes on them, like a smiley face, and you would like just ingest that patch that's been soaked in the LSD. So you swallow just a piece of paper. That's the typical way that it's done to store, and it's stored cold. Otherwise, you would see some of these people that have like a dispenser that's sort of filled up with the sort of LSD liquid, and they just click on it like a sort of pest dispenser and take a drop on their tongue.
Nice.
Okay. It can be a little bit more dangerous because you risk just taking way too much at the time.
You may have seen a Norwegian film, Den siste revejakta.
Yes, I have actually.
Yeah.
Kåre Conradi's character, it takes like 200 doses at once or something, and does not end well.
So, but that's, the microdose is then between like 20 to 50 micrograms. At this dose, you can sort of function normally, but you will have some slight increased sensitivity, and like they talk about all these sort of, it's quite individual with these effects, but you will have some effects. It will alter your perception somewhat, but you can still function as a relatively sane and intelligent person. You can go to work and do like a regular middle class 9-to-5 job. What do you consider like above 200 micrograms is what they would consider a breakthrough dose, where if you have a breakthrough dose and if you're not familiar with it, you will kind of be locked in for like the next 12 to 24 hours. It's going to be like you're going to have like this very powerful experience where you're like really like pulled out of your own kind of mind into some alternate kind of dimension. Below that, if you it's going to be stronger, say if you took like 100 grams, but you could still function somewhat or pull yourself back up, and you could drink a little alcohol and go for a walk outside and kind of pull yourself back up. But above that dose, you would have like this kind of what they consider like a breakthrough thing, and at this breakthrough levels is where people would have these epiphanies. Like say with Steve Jobs, he would think that I'm just a man like everybody else, and nobody's smarter than me, and I can just start this tech company, from the ground up, or like some kind of artistic, some idea for a new business. Something like that would typically happen. Like you would walk away from it with some kind of insight. It's been described as like a hero's journey, in a sense, that you walk away from like the regular life into the alternate sphere, and then you come back into your regular consciousness again with like a boon, in a sense. Like you bring a gift back. That's like this new insight that you gain about yourself.
Journey.
Yeah, it is like a very pathetic version of the heroic journey. But you see that lingo used a lot in these circles. The heroic dose is sort of considered. I think it was named by the stand-up comedian Bill Hicks, if you're familiar with him, and then you go at like 500 plus micrograms. So this is like a really sort of debilitating dose where you can't really do anything but lie down, and like the consciousness, the awareness you have is just completely broken down, and they feel like they're just kind of in another like completely different space, unable to. They're not going to be able to communicate. They're not going to be able to do a whole lot really, and doses at this level can be like psychosis inducing. If you talk about like these sort of overdosing, or you're not going to die from the overdose, but if this induces a type of psychosis, you can end up doing things to harm yourself or harming other people, like the people who believe they can fly, or they get these sort of ideas that they're immortal or something like that, or that they can run through walls. Or usually it's not going to be like that, but they end up getting some type of weird idea where they could get like a paranoid shock. So it is quite unpredictable, and it's not something you want to do if you're like a mentally kind of unstable person, and if you're on antidepressants or something. You absolutely do not want to use these types of dosages if you're not somewhat mentally stable.
I would say that goes for a lot of these drugs, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yes, but like this in particular, because it's not going to make you feel good like if you took some ecstasy or something. It's
make you even more schizo.
It's just going to make you more schizo.
Yeah, and some people have said the effects may linger for a long time if you're having a bad trip, as they say.
Yes, so we're getting into that on the next slide here. That I want to just talk about the what you would typically like the LSD experience here. It's like you see the graph. That's basically the lower one. That's the subjective effect over time, and that it goes from, like, say it's ingested orally. So even though it's liquid, it takes a little bit of time for your body to ingest. It's kind of like if you remember drinking alcohol for the first time, you were sort of thinking that you were expecting something to happen, and it didn't happen, so you kept drinking, and then you got way too drunk.
It hits you all at once, yeah.
Yeah, because there's a sort of delay there. Like it has to go through the digestive system and then into the blood. It's not like smoking it where it goes directly in. So it's like you start at 0 hours. So maybe at like the 2 to 2.5 hour mark, it reaches the top. That's called the peak of the experience. And this is like the really kind of intense part of it, where you're going to see the most. If you do end up seeing some type of, let's say, fractal patterns, spiral patterns, white lights, things like this, that it will be at this part, and you will have an increased heart rate, dryness, like really dilated eyeballs, like dilated pupils. And it's also like this point, like they call the peak, is important because this is when you're the most impressionable. Like if you were to try to influence someone using LSD, you'd want to try to hit them here. Like this is when you could put a suggestion into them that would have the most chance of succeeding. So I'm just looking through some of these experiences that people are going to have, that you quickly end up in these kind of thought feedback loops of like, say you're trying to figure out you ask yourself a question, how did I get here, for instance, and you try to, how did I get here? Well, I got here because I made an arrangement to get here. And well, why did I make the arrangement? Because because somebody saw something on Facebook. Why did I see it on Facebook? Because I installed the app. And you start thinking about these sort of like these kind of crazy thought patterns. Right. That would, you would think your way back to basically then, walking out of the ocean as like a lizard, basically. Yeah.
No, sorry. I was just.
Just ask questions and interject. If
you said you're very susceptible to impressions. Is this when, like we were talking about, like schizo moments?
Yes.
A slide ago. This is when this can hit, because if you're like, oh, I installed the app because I saw it on Facebook, but how did that ad get directed at me, etc.
Oh yeah, of course.
Out of control like that.
You can spiral out of control and start thinking about, well, shit, what am I doing with my information, and am I being watched, and so forth.
Yeah.
So I mean, usually, like, we get to the point, but they talk about the good trip or the bad trip, but is that how you handle this kind of peak experience? That's going to determine really how the trip is going to be. I mean, if you're able to slow down your heart rate and sort of calm down and relax and just enjoy yourself, then you could have a good experience. If you end up panicking here, then the panic is just going to go into like this continuous feedback loop, self-reinforcing, that you just get more and more panicked. And like you see this with people, like they might have to call the ambulance to get them to pick you up and just calm you down. This will particularly happen if you, like, say somebody poisoned you with this stuff, like they put it in your drink and you weren't aware of that you were participating in something like this. And
that's what happened the first time the Beatles took it, by the way. Some dentist guy put it in their coffee, I think. So yeah, not cool.
Let's see now. Here's the other thing. That's the idea of the lack of time. Is that this is sort of the thing that I can explain here, but it's really hard to explain to someone unless you've kind of experienced this. Like, I mean, you're walking around with your day-to-day consciousness that you have a very clear awareness of time. Like, okay, at what point in the day, where am I right now? Is this early? Is this late? Is it time for bed? Is it time to wake up? Is it time to eat? And you always have this kind of eternal clock schedule of what you were supposed to be doing. And if you've been doing, okay, you ask yourself, have I been doing this for a long time? And I now have a sort of idea about how long I've been sitting and doing this podcast.
Right.
But when you're using this stuff, it's like that just blown out completely, and you have sort of no reference for how long you've been doing something or how long something's been going on. So you get this idea of eternity, not eternity as like infinite time, but eternity as no time. Basically, it's like you have just no concept of how long you've been doing something or how long you're going to be doing something.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Let's.
Will you allow me to bring in William Blake once more?
Do it.
Because he has a verse that goes, "To see a world in a grain of sand, and heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour." So that's also very relevant to this kind of spiritual or psychedelic experience. Eternity in an hour.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
So, like, the other thing there is the lack of ego. And of course, this is a contentious word to use. It means a lot of different things. But let's just say identity, that you have a very clear idea of who you are about, I'm a person who I like to eat Mexican food and I like to wear black clothing and I wear a certain type of belt and I don't like to wear sneakers, so I want to wear boots. And you have a very clear idea about, the wants and the don't wants. And these types of preferences that you have and like how you present yourself and the kind of jokes you make and so on. And this is also a thing that gets kind of blown out, is that you tend to forget exactly what kind of person you were. And that's something that when you go out of the trip, you start remembering who exactly what kind of like role you were playing sort of socially. If you were like being sort of people think of you as like the clown person, or if you're like a reliable character, if you're supposed to be a father or a son, like that just seems to go out the window as well in the awareness that you have.
Yeah, we can connect this to the concept of the persona. It's when you realize that the persona is a mask. I mean, persona means mask in ancient Greek, I believe. So the ancients had this concept of they had this concept of losing your ego and realizing that you're taking part in a play, like Shakespeare said, all of life is but a stage, or however
Chinese
it goes.
or the Japanese have the same concept with is it the 3 or the 4 masks that everyone have?
Yes, the faces.
The faces, sorry, yeah.
And where this comes from is that you forget what the role was, but you realize that you're still here. So it's almost like this kind of philosophical thing where you go into, you can't explain who you are exactly. You might remember your name, but you can't explain the role that you have, but you realize that you're still present. There's still somebody there that's present, that's observing, that's having an experience, but you don't know who's having an experience. So then
you're sort of losing all the identifiers that you have for yourself.
Yes,
but you're still there.
You create. That's where some of the disassociation comes in. It's like you start disassociating the person who's sort of having the experience from the person you are in daily life. So there's like two people now. There's the person who's having the experience, and there's the character that you play in like daily life. And you start like after usually these experiences and under these influence, you start really thinking about it as basically like you have there's like two people here.
Yeah, it's quite scary. Like you can actually feel the information you usually take for granted just vanishing, who your own mother is or whatever. And the idea, I guess, is to just let go and just have a pure experience from a non-personal point of view in the literal sense.
Yep. So disassociation could also be it can mean different things, but sometimes it's like let's say the example of if you drive to work and when you park your car at your job, you don't remember actually driving there. I don't know if you've had this experience, but this
Yeah,
is
no, but you can have that when you're driving for quite some time. You
Yep.
like the autopilot sort of takes over, and you're like, "Oh shit, was I actually conscious for 5 minutes there
was
while
actually
driving?"
conscious there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is like one of Timothy Leary's way of describing this is that before he used some of this, the mescaline and had those experiences, he was at the dentist as a young boy. And like they would, use a different kind, like the type of anesthetic they would put you under at the dentist actually had this kind of psychoactive qualities. So they put him under, and you sort of feel like he went into like this sort of different conscious state. And later in his life, like when he was like 60 years old, he went back, I think 60 plus, he went back to the dentist and he got the same anesthetic. And he sort of felt like between those 2 points, when he was 10 years old and when he was 60 at the dentist, he's just been sleepwalking. Like, it's just been like, it's a kind of autopilot that's just been going through life that he could see from the outside. And that when you're inside it, you feel like you're sort of, I'm in total control. But when you get into this experience, you feel like, well, damn it, I've just been sleepwalking. I'm just following a script, basically, that I'm just repeating over and over and over again. And I wasn't really thinking about myself and trying to reprogram myself. I was just kind of following stimulus and reacting.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, as opposed to listening or being aware of your internal voice. Is that what the Greek called the logos? I believe so. So yeah.
Now you have to remember that there's been studies that quite a substantial amount of people apparently don't have an inner monologue, so they might not even have that inner voice.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, I think we're getting to that later, but I think
sorry.
I had that. Sorry, weird aside for a moment. I had like an argument, like I had a talk with someone sometime, like a year or two ago. And I was trying to sort of like, in a Jordan Peterson-esque, sell someone on the concept of Christianity, right? And I told them that, in a sense, you could look at, the concept of Jesus for a Westerner, right? It's that voice in your head telling you how you ought to be, what you should do at any moment, right? Many people might feel that like what you should be doing. What's the most optimal thing I could do right now? Instead of like sitting here having this podcast, I could be working out, right? I could be doing something else instead of playing video games. I could be taking out the trash. I could be fixing my fence, etc., etc. And that person just didn't have any sort of thought like that at all.
No, a lot of people I find don't have that, and like we go back to like the NPC meme here. I mean, particularly with the last 3 years and the stuff that we've seen, I think it's been shown pretty clearly. So, but I think we could keep skipping. I'm just gonna go. I'll go
coming
to the
up
side
on 3
effects.
hours.
Yeah,
I mean, we might split this into a two-parter.
How many slides do we have left? Let's just see.
We have quite a few. Because we have to go through the 8-circuit model of consciousness, and then there's the 4 lower circuits influencing the 4 lower circuits, and then there's the whole like brainwashing stuff.
What does the audience feel like? Let's see.
We have about 10, 15 more slides here.
All right. Well,
that sounds a bit much. Yeah.
I'm going to try to keep going, and let's see if we could go in half an hour. And if you're not done it in a half an hour, then I can try to pack it into another presentation at later.
Yeah, sure. People are sleepy and they want 4 more slides.
4 more slides, guys. All right. Okay, I'm just going to try to speed run some of these ideas. We're not doing the based usage stuff. I mean, I talked about the ceremonial stuff. Is that there are a lot of ancient traditions and cultures where they have these type of rituals that you're sort of expected to do to be a part of the tribe, and it's like for initiation and for bonding and so on. So something people can research themselves if they're interested in doing so. Let's see. Okay, there we go with the idea of like the 8th circuit model of consciousness. This is something that Tim Leary created, and Robert Anton Wilson tried to popularize and further create. And it's sort of a model of how to imprint the human mind. So if you keep going, let's see. It's I mean, what is the point of it? You're trying to basically create a map of how does consciousness work? And when I say consciousness, I mean awareness, like the levels of awareness in a human being. How exactly are they stacked? If you have to imagine that you have like a stack of sort of software that runs on hardware.
It's kind of what we talked about earlier with the driving thing. Like,
yes,
the autopilot that drives for those 5 minutes when you're not really paying attention.
Yep,
is on a different level. Is that what you're saying?
It's it is like those. It's not just that, but it's also a kind of developmental theory, like with Piaget. Ken Wilber has something similar. Freud has something similar. That's called the theory of psychosexual development. Ken Wilber has a developmental theory. So this has to it's not just about levels of consciousness, but like how a child basically develops these degrees of awareness as they grow older, and at what point they stop, and what levels that are possible, and how you can use this kind of these levels to influence people and change how people think. So it's called circuits because Timothy Leary was just obsessed with this kind of like cyber culture. So he wanted to use this kind of like cybernetic computer science lingo for everything. So he uses electronic circuits, but you could call it kind of a system instead. So we'll take a look at them. See, so the first circuit. I mean, you could think of this in terms of like the human brain is basically layered in like 3 layers of a human brain, and the lowest layer is like called the lizard brain. That is, it's like this very low level of consciousness that's only interested in basically physical safety, nourishment, food, shelter, and so on. So like this is a baby basically that's just been born. They have they can't even see themselves as separate from their own mother, and they're only interested in crying basically if they don't feel safe. They want to be breastfed. They want to eat and so on. They want warmth, and they want to know that they're going to be safe from these more threatening ideas. And this circuit basically works as a kind of 2-dimensional scale, where it's either you have an imprint that's more towards trust, or an imprint that's more towards suspicion, meaning it's like depending on how dangerous you think the world is around you and how much you want to explore. So this is a little bit like the Big Five concept of openness.
So what you're saying is that the trait openness here gets imprinted in circuit 1.
Yeah, it's not exactly the same as openness, but it gets imprinted.
Well, yeah,
like
but
it's
trust versus suspicion thing. Yeah,
it's say for instance like a baby that has been held, contra the theory that a baby should just be allowed to lie there and cry, right? These 2 different ways of raising a baby is that the most likely the baby who is just lying by themselves and crying until they stop crying will have imprinted like a suspicion type, have a suspicious imprint. Whereas the baby who was always breastfed when they needed to and they were always cared for, they're going to have like a high trust imprint.
Yeah.
And that's what I go back to, like circumcision, for instance, is that Timothy Leary and Robert Anton Wilson believe that circumcision creates like a sort of suspicion imprint, like it creates a low trust imprint, and that the cultures that practice circumcision are like low trust cultures.
Huh.
So yeah, I mean that's a lot of stuff, but I'm just gonna try to go through.
Yeah, no, but it's interesting stuff. It's I'm just thinking my chakra is expanding.
Yeah, we got the expanding the chakras here. Okay, the second circuit of development is the territorial circuit, and this is like say when the child becomes about 2 years old and they start seeing themselves as separate from the world. Then they start gaining an awareness that there's me in the world and there's other people here as well. And there's kind of a tribe of people around me, and you try to figure out. Yeah.
You wrote the terrible two, so I was going to say this is when they're like they don't want to share anything with anyone. And
no, they don't want to. They want to just you want to tell them to eat,
Yeah.
eat the broccoli, and they say no because they need to see if they can dominate you. That's basically what they're trying to figure out here. Is like, can I dominate my parents? Or is my parents going to dominate me? And based on that perception, they're going to create a hierarchy of who's like the top dog, who dominates everybody else, and who has to submit. And so this is like the second layer of consciousness, is that they understand domination and submission. And from that, they get an idea of a hierarchy. And this is where like politics come into the picture, like the idea of punishing and rewarding. And who's the boss, basically.
I see.
So from these two circuits, you gain like this kind of mammalian personality grid. Is that you could land on some point where you
mammalian political compass. Yeah,
the mammalian political compass is that you could be like sort of the dominating high trust leader, the suspicious kind of tyrant leader, submission. You're like this kind of looser person in the left bottom quadrant here, or you could be like this kind of trusting kind of what do you call it? This kind of cowed. Person who just has to be guided around by others.
Yeah,
this is the Norwegian quadrant, the bottom right. All right, we'll just keep we'll just keep sliding through here.
I really like this. I'm glad we kept going. These are good.
So this is the third circuit here. It's basically the symbolic circuit. I mean, it has different names for the people who know in like the comments. I had to change some of the names a little bit because they were too esoteric or too coarse. But this is like when you start getting awareness of language and sort of understanding that words point to stuff in the real world, or you see text or pictures or signs, and you realize that this represents something. And so you start developing these systems of symbols that you use to navigate the world. Like you create a map, languages, mathematics, and so forth. So like the language that you use, that's going to be a part of your imprint, the how you write, the art that you watch. And this is like the sort of when you get to this kind of Gramscian level, when they talk about like Gramscian infiltration and the creating like the hegemony, is that the people who control this imprint, basically who control the language, they can sort of control people's thinking, and like the medium is the message in a sense, because how the way your language is structured logically affects how you think.
Yeah, and the way the payload is delivered is already a context.
Oh yes, it is.
Yeah.
So. But here you also get what's called like mimetic evolution, that you can sort of inherit. Like people get smarter, quote unquote, over time because they stand on the shoulders of giants, as they say. Like they will inherit the systems that their parents had. You inherit the language and the science and the literature and everything. So you can just reference that. You don't have to reinvent it every time. So this is like where historical progress comes in, is that we can have this mimetical evolution through inheriting this kind of symbolic linguistic information that we have an awareness of. Okay, next circuit. So here, like we're getting to puberty, where you go from being this kind of autistic person into basically understanding that there's a social system here, right? This is sort of there are other people, and it's not just like dominating them or stuff, but you have to get stuff from them, and you have to try to work within a social context. And like puberty comes in, and you try to look for mates and a mating opportunity moment. And the Joker moments there, the mini Jokers, and like you have to figure out, how do I reproduce, and how am I supposed to function in this reproductive system? How do we raise children? How do we supposed to think about it? How are we going to court people, say, for mating and dating? And
I mean, this is a long. I mean, this spans like from the moment you hit puberty until you're like 25, probably.
Yes, it's a long time that you takes to sort of understand it, and I mean the imprints changes, with how people are imprinted now, with the kind of Tinder culture is different than say our grandparents had with the kind of traditional dating in a Christian church or something. So yeah, we could keep going. So I mean, I just made this one really short because when we get beyond like the first 4 circuits, we get into more of this kind of woo-woo territory here, where we get into like this really kind of crazy, esoteric, weird stuff. But the idea is that basically a regular person through their lifetime, they will imprint and develop the first 4 circuits. And this is the MPC. That's where they have those 4 programs. And by overriding those 4 programs, you program the MPC. Basically, right. So you have to then be conscious of these levels. But when you get to like say circuit 5, like neurosomatic, is that you gain a meta awareness. It's like you gain awareness of the first 4 circuits, and you start understanding that, well, damn it, I'm like running on these autopilot programs here, and they're getting me into trouble. So you start thinking about maybe slowing yourself down a little bit and not being so caught up in I mean, this is what you talked about. I could be doing something else with my time, right?
Right.
Yeah. Or this newspaper is making me angry or something, and it's just activating this stuff. So maybe I should try to change the channel. That's when you start getting into the.
It's being aware of the tiger, I suppose, and then the next one would probably be riding the tiger or something.
So with the 6th one, it's got like the neuroelectric awareness, and of course I might just like be misunderstanding. This is not very easy to understand, but you get like the archetypal awareness. That is like you realize that you're not just a single person, but you are kind of a part of a genetic lineage who has existed for a certain amount of time, and you realize that there were probably like a person exactly like you who existed at like a previous point.
Jesus, you have to get all the way to 6 just for that?
Yeah, that's like the 6th where you start like thinking about the idea of self, right? It's not just like you in a physical body. It's like you basically are like on a continuum here, and that a person
I'm just
like
having
you,
a moment here where I feel like everyone must be really stupid if this is.
Well, that's what the
I'm not
authors,
trying to sound like an ass, but
that's what the authors suggest.
This is basic
basically.
stuff, isn't it?
But yeah, this is how they break it up. It's not really basic for like the regular like the normie NPC.
That's what I mean.
They don't think about that stuff.
Yeah, that's what I mean. If if all it takes is to care this little, and you're 2 steps beyond an NPC, quote unquote.
Two steps beyond the NPC here.
I mean, Jesus, the bar is pretty low.
Yeah, the bar's pretty low, but I mean,
you can see they're beginning to form cracks in the NPC there. So I guess that's
true. That's a pretty good representation.
I mean, when you're getting to the let's say the neurogenetic circuit, you start becoming not only aware that you have like these circuits, but that you can also change the circuits, and you start actively incorporating the idea of like, okay, I need to be different. Like I see that like these autopilot programs, they don't work for me in the current situation, so I have to change the autopilots on all these levels. And like this is when you get into like people who do a lot of meditation, and they have to do all these breathing exercises. And
would you say that in many ways the dissident right as a collective is currently on that plane?
Nope. That's
is it beyond?
No, we're not beyond that. I think most of the dissident right people are at number 5.
Well, I mean,
honestly, number 5 or 6.
I mean, more as a collective, because you have all of these sort of trying to break this going on at the same time. You have the Boomer Truth regime. You have all the people, yelling about seed oils. All of but all of these things.
In a sense,
like
we're approaching. We're trying to
that's
get
what
there.
I'm saying.
So there is an evolution.
We're like
there.
hatchlings, like trying to get out of the egg here, right?
Yep. And then there's like the 8th circuit, that is like kind of like this wonder level thing where you start to become aware of like this kind of non-local information. That sounds weird. I mean, if you're familiar with Carl Jung's concept of synchronicity, that's basically what it is. And there's like most people do not ever reach this level of awareness. This is like straight before you die, you might have like an epiphany on this. Where you realize that there's like more stuff, there's more going on in the world than just like the physical cause and effect reality. There's apparently some other like metaphysical level that you become aware of it. Like you just straight before you die or something, you have a near-death experience, you become like slightly aware that there's another level there to the universe that you're not really aware of and you're not seeing. Goals, I guess. We could let's just keep going.
I mean, some like extreme sports people say they use like their sport for those kind of experiences. Race car drivers, etc. Like putting yourself into like unnatural situations and dangerous situations to
They
trigger
could be getting
these kind
dangerous
of
situations, but I think about like, say you're like almost dying, like your system's like breaking down,
right.
or you're
I
not
mean,
getting oxygen or something.
It's going to be quite crazy if you want to get to the real stuff, I think. But that might be more like a different approach to the psychedelic, actually. Now that I think about
you
it,
could certainly have a powerful experience, but I don't think it's not going to give you awareness of anything by just driving fast or something. Yeah.
No, I wasn't saying that. I was just thinking out loud about these things. Okay, let's keep going.
Yep. So influencing the lower four circuits, brainwashing for fun and profit. I'm just going to go into a little bit here of how it's possible to influence these things. Of course, this is purely academic. Of course, let's take a look. So, I mean, I just put some references here in pop culture that you might have been aware of. There's the movie The Manchurian Candidate. Has any of you seen it?
I believe I've seen the remake, but I might have seen some of the original film as well, actually, but it's been a long time.
I mean, the original is like with Frank Sinatra, black and white. It's actually quite good.
Yep.
It has like a slight like proto-pause in there. But it's really about a guy who they get captured by the communists, and then they get programmed to be these sort of hitmen, this kind of disassociative hitmen, where they've been kind of like they're just kind of activated by certain stimuli, and when they get activated, they're supposed to run a program to just like kill American politicians on command, basically, as a type of hypnosis. The second one here is like Clockwork Orange. You're probably familiar with that.
Yes.
Where they use a type of, the sort of Ludovico technique, where they make him watch stuff that's kind of unpleasant to him to sort of condition him to reject his previous lifestyle and kind of override it with something that's more compliant in society. And Charles Manson is also a guy that's quite famous. He also had certain CIA connections, and like the interesting thing is that if you look more into, like, for the people interested, some documentaries on the Charles Manson family. I mean, Charles Manson is not even sort of a midwit. He seems like he wants to be a complete kind of nut, but he seemed to have an almost impeccable understanding of how to brainwash people to do stuff he wanted, like almost like you're sort of top communist intelligence officer or something like that. And people believe that's his because of his connections to the CIA and so forth. But I can't prove anything.
Yeah, I don't know too much about those connections, but he was definitely a charismatic sort of guy, and there are connections there to the Laurel Canyon scene that I mentioned earlier. And of course, he named his program or whatever Helter Skelter after the Beatles tune. And there are a lot of things to mention there involving Roman Polanski and stuff. But I won't go into that.
Let's keep going. I wanted to just talk about like these words that are being used here, because it's very easy to interchange the words brainwashing with influence, with subliminal messaging and so on. So brainwashing as a legal term must be understood like it is a legal term. It's something that you can actually use in court. Let's say like Walrus is then put in front of a jury or said that you're accused of killing someone, and you can actually claim brainwashing as a defense. Right. And say that I was brainwashed into doing it. And on some cases, like I say with Patty Hearst, this has actually worked. Like she was actually let go because the jury sort of believed that it was sort of a plausible explanation that she was not, she had been brainwashed against her will. So that's the first thing, differentiating a brainwashing from influence. Because like you see with these people, like you're influenced all day, like through commercials and through movies, media and so on, but you are in a sense consenting to it, and you're willingly participating in it. So you cannot claim brainwashing as a defense.
Right.
The other part of claiming brainwashing as a defense is that it has to happen within a certain time frame. Like it can't be happening over 5 years, so like 10 years, it has to be like reasonably fast. So in the sense of like Patty Hearst, this is a woman who was like a regular American sort of white middle class girl, and she was then kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, as one of these more radical kind of leftist militia groups. And then she basically ended up killing people for that army. And she used brainwashing as a type of defense, because they kidnapped her from her house and then exposed her to this kind of like hardcore, trauma and conditioning that they were able to sort of, in a short amount of time, reprogram her to be a type of a killer for the cause, so to speak. So the element of force has to be there. Disassociation is also another part. I mean, if it's brainwashing, it's like you might not even remember doing it. It's like sleepwalking. So they'll basically be created two disassociative personalities, where it's like one is your regular conscious middle class self, and the other one is like this kind of stone cold assassin. So in terms of like influence and subliminal messaging, you had these like the Judas Priest court case, where there were people who had committed suicide, after listening to Judas Priest. And this is sort of called like subliminal messaging, where they talked about how there was like this influence, underlying in this music, where they would talk about, killing yourself. But it's not going to hold up in court. Basically, that's the precedent that's been done now, and it's might be an interesting topic to look at. The effectiveness of subliminal messaging, but it's just not. It's not the same as brainwashing, basically.
Right.
So we could skip to the next slide here.
Let's see here.
Right. Okay. So this is the brainwashing blueprint to sort of explain how this would typically work. And like the case is like, okay, when would you actually need to do this? When do you actually need to have someone just create a different personality? And the most typical and historically persistent example would be military applications.
I was going to say it has to be military, yes. Right?
So you have to then, in peacetime, you have to be able to exist with your family and your community, and you have to build and form good relations, be positive, be a good role model for children, and try to basically be non-confrontational, fit in, get along, go along to get along. But then wartime comes along, and you need people to then basically be something else. You can't just be this kind of soft, punchy middle-class person. You have to then just become like a total killer. And there needs to be...
You're going to have to become a war hawk against Russia.
I mean, it's quite relevant now, but so like Timothy Leary and Robert Anton Wilson, they will compare like these sort of like hardcore brainwashing exercises. It's really similar to what happens if you join the American military. Is that they will, you'll be taken away from your home, and all of your connections will be broken. So you might not even have the chance to call people or contact them.
Yeah, it's like cult stuff, really.
So you're taken away from your family and all of these kind of circuit one connections. And you're usually going to be subjected to a kind of trauma. Because this is important, just like with the LSD or with these kind of near-death experiences, is that there's some kind of like powerful imprinting experience. It's interesting they use the word in Norwegian "inntrykk." I mean, it actually means imprint. It's like they would have said "inntrykk." It made a strong imprint on me.
Yeah, that's true.
Meaning that it's like it's basically an imprint on your brain from a certain powerful experience that shaped your personality.
Yeah, that's true.
You start with the shock and awe, which is, I mean, say the American military, they have to make you do a physical exam. So you get stripped and you have to stand stripped in front of people. They're going to like, bend over so I check your asshole, this kind of stuff. It's like you'll be humiliated and stripped in front of other people and inflicted it. And then you will just be put into this kind of training program where you will, it will be traumatizing. And from that trauma and that isolation, like usually it's like this. You first have the trauma, and then you have the isolation, and then people are susceptible. I mean, like if you've read sort of books on influence, they talk about how they could, the police can just put people in these 2x2 cells for a certain amount of time, and they can get them to confess to anything. And it's a bit of the same principle. You have to have people in that receptive state, to reprogram them. And when you have people in that receptive state, you just have to start from the bottom of the stack and move upwards. So the first point of the stack here is then circuit 1 is that, the lizard dimension. That's like, where does my safety and my shelter and my food come from? And then you realize that you're getting the food from the state now. You're getting it from the military. It's not your parents anymore. It's not the job. It's not the local community. It's a completely different system of safety that you're going to be exposed to and that you get attached to. Circuit 2 in print is basically like to expose them to the new kind of political environment, or the new hierarchy, and that it's like the Full Metal Jacket, the Sergeant Hartman experience, where you have the officers come out and yell at you and tell you you're a piece of shit, and they'll punch you and they like try to. So you're put at the bottom of the hierarchy. You have to become submissive to a new kind of authority. Basically, there's like new alpha males coming in. Yep. And it starts off by basically, I police them because I have to. Right, it's like, okay, you feel like, okay, he's going to hit me if I don't do it, but then over time that becomes that you police them because you want to. You try to impress your officers. Yeah, it's the same way Stockholm syndrome works. It's like in the beginning it's forced, but then you learn to sort of like live with it. In a sense, you learn to live with it, and then you start enjoying it after a while. So I mean, the third imprint is basically like you have to really sort of control their thought space, and this is like this. We're super exposed to this in this culture, like say with the trans stuff, like you say that trans women are women, and they force you to say that trans women are women, or else you're going to lose your job or you get banned from Twitter. Like this, so you basically have to force people to accept things that are totally arbitrary. The example from the book is that the let's say in the army, let's say if you say that like you're given a rifle, and if you say that the rifle is a gun, they force you to say that, like, this is my rifle, this is my gun. And like, they're going to force you to just walk around and say that over and over and over again. And so it's like trying to reinforce new thought patterns and make people just accept certain things. And after you've accepted the nonsense, you have to sort of start feeling superior to people who don't accept the nonsense. It's just like the same with like the sort of woke stuff. Like if you think that trans women are women, then you're basically superior to people who don't think so. Or having these kind of like weird cultish views makes you better than other people. So basically the Fourth Circuit reprint is something that's not typically done in Western militaries yet. But this is that you have to kind of re-imprint their relationship they have to sexuality. And that will, like not likely to happen in like a public, say if you went into the Norwegian military, but if you went into a prison gang and you went in the same direction, they would probably expect you to participate perhaps in like raping an inmate, or like you would be raped by someone else in the shower, and you would sort of have like a completely reinterpretation of how sexuality works in that setting. With someone who joins ISIS or some type of terrorist group, they would also be kind of forced to participate in sexual activities. You have the same thing with sororities, like American sororities and some of these like Mason clubs, where they force you to participate in sexual acts, even if you're straight. So
they do a bunch of weird stuff. Yeah. So
they'll also sort of reprint the Fourth Circuit. So once you've done here, like you've done the entire NPC stack, and you've created a completely new person. And assuming that this person that you're doing this to, if they don't have any meta awareness, if they don't have like a Fifth Circuit awareness of the meta, or a Sixth Circuit awareness of themselves in like a collective consciousness, or a Seventh Circuit in terms of like reprinting themselves, they're basically stuck. Like they don't have any tools to kind of understand what's been done to them, or how they've changed. It's kind of like these people now that have gone from, like we talked about, they've gone from the I'm scared of everything agoraphobia bacteria to now we're just gonna like fuck the Russians, we're gonna destroy everything, and we're gonna bomb the Russians. Like they've just gone from one to the other because they have no like layer of consciousness to even process that these changes that have happened in saying like the third or the Second Circuit because of the media and system manipulations. Right. Okay. So I'm done with this one. Finishing up. We did it. Speed run here. This is the last slide here. Are we missing a trick here? Because
before we go into that, I'll just briefly add while I remember it. Julius Flavius says Evola talks about how vulnerable people with no inner autonomy are to advertising and how vulnerable people with no inner autonomy are to advertising and propaganda in the Bow and the Club. Excellent book, by the way. And yes, very good book. I'm shilling for Avila again. If you can, get the Arctos Publishing books, because those covers are beautiful. Every single book, buy them and watch the Longhouse. Okay, keep going.
Yep. Well, this is actually the final slide here. Is that you look at the like we talked about last time, the lack of meta-political understanding in the conservative circles, but this is also another one, like the right-wing approach to psychology, is that they don't. It's extremely, I wouldn't say shallow, but like very one-sided. With someone like, I put Stefan Molyneux in here because like he is very interested in psychology, and his wife is a psychologist, and he studied the work of Nathaniel Branden. But like his approach is basically just we need to you need to just make arguments, right? And just this is an argument, this is not an argument. Like the new left brigade that sort of runs the world right now, they don't give a shit about the argument.
Yeah, that's
they
the
just
weird thing.
go to everything else.
But I think that's because of his what's it called? Objectivism, I guess. That he feels that, which is, it's correct in a way. Like if the competence sphere or the competence center just kind of goes their own way by making their arguments, the rest will either have to follow or society collapses. But I don't think that's true. Like, I think the society we have constructed now can run on the fumes for quite a few years before collapsing.
Yeah, I mean, these techniques that they're using, it's sort of like, it doesn't matter, I think, where you're from. It's this is a toolbox basically of how to influence people, and it's particularly useful with Europeans, I find, because they're harder to manage in strict hierarchies, so they have to be nudged.
Interesting.
Okay, well, I'm basically done. I'm actually happy.
Sorry, I'm just thinking. I'm just having a moment. This has been very interesting. Mm-hmm. Sorry, what?
Is there any questions we could do?
If anyone have any questions in chat, I know we covered a lot of ground, and as you said at the beginning, we might have to revisit this in the future sometime.
I mean, I'm reading about this kind of MK Ultra serial killer stuff. That, I mean, if you know this, if you've watched this one, it's probably going to be more. You're going to get more out of the next one. But it is very heavy subject matter, and I think maybe there's some episodes in the future we could do something a bit lighter or funnier.
I mean, there's room for both.
Yeah.
We have a lot of weird stuff planned. I'm not sure of the order, but I have certainly a lot of topics that a lot of different people want to cover. Okay. I'm not sure if there's any interest in the chat right now. I think we're all strung out from this ride. If you have any comments, anything you'd like our takes on, post them in the chat. We'll be here for another 5 minutes maybe. If you don't, I know that Radical Liberation is doing a probably very good stream right now, which I'm going to go catch up on afterwards. No more slides, says Elastic Formula. That's true. No more slides. Do you guys have any comments, any ending comments, Vingol or Ludwig?
Well, I guess I can just acknowledge that I've sort of let my freak flag fly on this stream to paraphrase David Crosby, in an old tune. But maybe I should reiterate that I don't. What's the word? I don't condone the usage of any such substance as we have discussed here, and
neither do
I never have,
really.
because it's very, first of all, it's very personal, and yeah, whatever. Just trying to do yeah.
I mean, I can understand you guys have some prior experience, and I'm not going to dig too deep on how much that is. But for my own, I'm a good boy. I've never done any kind of drugs like that. So
yeah, and I just wanted to acknowledge, like, there is a difference between a genuine experience and these techniques that have been employed. I mean, I am not blue-pilled on the overall schemes, let's say, behind this radical change in the culture in the 60s.
right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I knew that this topic would be sort of polarizing. I mean, we have less viewers than we had last time, even though it's still
Yeah,
more than
I think we
usually have.
peaked at 20 or something, which is
20 last time.
Yeah.
So I assume that there would be less interest in this because of the subject matter, and maybe
fair enough.
later people will come back and take a look at it. And like I'm very aware this is like it's a little bit off color for like the dissident right. So I'm just like kind of asking to just take this as a bit of information that might be useful because it's highlighting something that I think is ignored. So
knowing is half the battle, as the old saying goes. From the 80s, I suppose. Maddie G says, "Glad I found you through Prudentialist. I'm a Norseman in the New World, second generation. Mum is from Grimstad." Well, I'm glad you found me through the Prudentialist as well, and I made sure to thank him for all the good work he has done in shilling for our channel here, and I'm glad some more Americans are discovering us. We're especially welcoming of Norwegians in America as well. It's a common saying, I guess, that there are more Norwegians and Norwegians descendants in America than there is in Norway. So
it's the Wisconsinites.
Yes,
voting for Biden. Minnesotans voting for Biden.
Minnesota,
That's
yeah.
We're fucking up their politics.
We are
over there. They should have stayed in Norway.
The eternal Norwegian, always the merchant. Okay. Vingles something simp says, "A fine presentation regardless. Thank you." This is Mongolian Doggerland, isn't it? I have to, because he keeps changing his name.
Yeah.
Have you guys read anything about Ernst Jünger and drugs?
I've heard the name.
I haven't.
I'm not. Sadly, I'm not familiar with him. Maybe Vingle is.
I haven't. I'm very keen on reading his most famous book. Can't recall the name right now, but I didn't know about any drug connection.
I have him.
I mean, he was sorry. I mean, he was a soldier, so he was probably familiar with amphetamines, but maybe more than that as well.
He's on my reading list. But I haven't gotten to him yet because I have to get through Spengler first. And if that doesn't put me on the list, reading Jünger is probably going to put me on the list. So we'll see. Skeptical Waves has some Jünger according to Vulpes Persona. So if you're interested, you can get some audiobooks there.
I'm thinking about Storm of Steel, by the way. It's the book I'm keen to read.
Oh, if you're an upstate New Yorker from Norway, in the south of Norway, and you're second generation, then you're probably one of the ones going over in the 50s to make money, and I guess your parents just stayed. There were a lot of Norwegians in New York in the 50s, in the 60s, I guess, especially from the south of Norway. Okay, I think we're going 3.5 hours. I'm tired. I have to go pack for a trip. And so I think it's time that we sign off. If you have nothing better to do with your evening or day, I will be posting a link to a stream that Radical Liberation is doing right now on war versus the right, which I will recommend that you go watch and give him a hello. And with that, I think we'll end the show for tonight. Thank you, both of you, Ludwig Path and Vingel, for coming on, and especially Ludwig Path for putting together all of this and compiling all this information. Very good presentation.
It was my pleasure. So I hope the viewers enjoyed it.
Yeah, you always impress with the presentations, Ludwig. So
Thanks.
Very good.
Yeah, very good.
Good research. By the way, subscribe to Vingel.
Subscribe to Vingel. Subscribe to Walrus as well. Subscribe if you haven't.
Absolutely.
I usually end up putting links to socials down below, especially the Matrix channel is interesting if you want some to talk to people who sort of exist in the sphere of influence of this channel. If not, I will probably see you next week. Thank you for turning in, and have a good night.